Good morning and welcome to City Hall. We'll get started with our invocation and Pledge of Allegiance. I'll ask Councilman Larry McAtee if he wouldn't mind leading us in the invocation this morning. Then I'll ask Councilman Gary Mars to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Would everyone please stand?
Let's pray. Father, we thank you for the opportunities you give us as a city. We thank you for our mayor and our city staff. We thank you for the diligence that's gone into preparing the budget that's got us to this point. Give those who are presenting from the fire and police the wisdom to share those things that we need to know about, and then give us the wisdom as we move forward to make decisions that will be pleasing to you. May we recognize that we're stewards of this community and the people who live here are your people, and we need to make decisions that will better all the folks that we can. We thank you now in Jesus' name. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Call the meeting to order. Are there any uncontested continuances today, Jim?
Not that I'm aware of.
All right, then we'll recess the council meeting, convene as the Finance Committee, and have a budget workshop. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, this is the 11th budget I've had the opportunity to present to the City Council, and I've had the opportunity to present budgets during good economic times and bad economic times, and if you have your choice, good economic times is a better option. And this is, we need to be careful when we say good economic times. It's relative to last year. It's very good economic times, but if you take a look at the trends that we've seen, it's really more moderate economic times. And Craig's going to go into that in some more specifics today as we go in and take a look at our revenues over the last few years. But with this budget, I think we've achieved some of the goals that the council gave us to when we started the budget process in the workshop and some other times we got direction to get off the fund balance, get off the MAPS 3 use tax for public safety, to put those public positions back into the general fund. We were able to, with the help of federal dollars, get the firefighter positions restored. This budget does restore the uniform positions in the police department that were eliminated, and we were able to restore some of the key cuts that we made over the last year and a half. And not all of them, but the ones that we think are most important. And so that is a better situation to be in. There's a lot of things we could do with more money. And the ideas out there and the program improvements that are suggested that the council likes to do, there's a lot of good things we can do. We can enhance code enforcement. We can, more police officers and firefighters is a good thing. Having more money to repair roads is a good thing. More code enforcement is a good thing. There's a lot of good things that we could do with more money. But we put together a budget this year, I think, that addresses our core needs and was able to restore some of the cuts that we made in last year. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Craig Freeman, and we'll go over a budget overview this morning, and then that will be followed by presentations on the police department and then by the fire department.
Thank you. As Jim said, we're going to take a little bit of time just to look at an overview of the budget and have some discussion about how it relates to our council priorities, a little bit about the process. Take a look at the budget book. I know you all had got your budget books last Friday, but wanted to take a little bit of time to go through there and look at that. It's just so much information, and talk about the organization within the budget book and how to find some of the information that's in there. Overall, our budget's $919 million. The operating budget, and we've pulled out the general fund budget there, but the operating budget combines about $573 million, and the general fund portion of that is $364 million. We wanted to talk a little bit about our process that we
go back there. I think we would go back to that last slide just for a minute, because I think this is really important to understand. 364 is our basic general fund. The non-operating funds, $208 million, that's made up of about, 5 different things. It's water and wastewater operations, it's the solid waste operations, storm sewer operations, airport operations that are all funded by fees and not taxes, so that's why they're not part of the general fund. And then we've got the 3/4 cent public safety sales tax dollars in there, which right now runs about $70 million. Mm-hmm. And so that 70 with those other operations, that's your 208. And so, those are, we talked about the general fund is a 365. Those non-operating funds, we call it other operating funds, our total operating budget is another 208. And again, that's the water, wastewater, solid waste, stormwater, and public safety, 3/4% sales tax. That gets you up to about 570. And then non-operating funds is mostly capital. That's mostly GEO bonds, MAPS 3, MAPS for Kids, airport capital, water capital, and other things that fall within that category. There's some other things in there, but that primarily, most of the non-operating funds are capital.
And
I just want to give you the big overview of how you get to that 990.
Does the non-operating funds include the debt service on GEO bonds, for instance?
It includes the debt service fund, yes.
Yes, sir.
And we separate those out because of the fact that they're not tied to day-to-day operations, and the fact that there's a lot of changes in those, particularly where we have special sales taxes, that the numbers can change significantly, and we don't want to give the impression that that's an direct impact on operations. Looking at our budget process, the budget process actually is about 6 months worth of work that we do with the departments and working with the council and the manager's office. Really the process, or the information that feeds the budget process, starts with the citizen survey in the summer that helps us get feedback from our citizens about how we're performing on our services and about what they see as the highest priorities for them. The budget development, the strategic business planning process then takes that citizen survey information and starts with the council priorities that are updated every other year as the council meets like we did this last fall and discusses our priorities for the city and sets out what we have now as our 9 priorities, and we're going to look at those in just a few minutes and how the budget helps to address those priorities. The council priorities and citizen survey information is taken and used by departments as they update their business plans. And so when they go through and look at their issues that they're facing, look at how they're developing their budgets, they do that in relation to the information from the council priorities and from the citizen survey. All of that information then feeds into, when we begin the budget development, to help us look at where we're going to put our resources in the areas that we need to target the most, looking at the issues that the departments have identified in business plans, looking at the issues and priorities identified by the council and those identified by the city, by the citizens in the citizen survey. The budget development itself occurs, departments start working in their budgets in December, in January. In February, we do an internal review of those and begin working with the departments, the budget office, and the city manager's office, and doing further review and discussing the priorities of the departments. In many situations, we're looking at budget cuts and what we have to cut, or what we're going to have to reduce. And this year, we were fortunate enough we didn't have to make budget cuts, and we were able to focus on making improvements within many areas or restoring some of the services that were eliminated over the last couple of years. And then we come back, and there are some deliberations or discussions with the council and some of the briefings that we'll do, and the city manager interacts with you all as we're developing and finalizing the budget, and then we come back and present that budget in May. We'll have our finance committee meetings over the next several weeks. Every other week we'll have a finance committee meeting, and we're scheduled then for adoption on the 14th, and we'll look at the calendar at the end. We wanted to look at our council priorities, and I think there's been a couple of things that have been mentioned recently with the way that the council priorities are listed. There's been a couple of references on that, and I want to make clear that the council priorities are not listed in any kind of priority order, that they are listed, and we were looking at the other day, and at one time I think we'd started with alphabetic order, and then as we've made changes and we've eliminated some and plugged in new priorities, they're not even in alphabetic order now, but there is not a priority order to those. So one that falls on the bottom, for instance, I think citizen safety falls on the bottom. Well, obviously, if you look at the resources we put into public safety, that is not our lowest priority. So there's no reflection of priority order in the priorities of the council. It's just these are the individual priorities. And we'll look at the 9 priorities and how the budget relates to addressing those priorities. The citizen survey is one that's funded this year. We'll be receiving the citizen survey sometime in July is what we're expecting right now, and it'll be presented to the city council. That is really important for us in keeping citizen confidence and listening to our citizens. And it's a way that we generally receive information back from the city, from the citizens about how they feel about the services. Focusing on results, we talked a little bit about strategic business planning and how that works into identifying the priorities for the departments, but also each department develops performance measures as a part of that and then reports that out. We have 2 reports that come to the city council each year. We're now doing an annual citizens report on performance to try to make that information more available. This summer we're going to be opening up on the website, putting more performance information available on the website, for citizens to be able to go out on okc.gov and get that information. And in this next fiscal year, our plan is to be able to get to where we're updating that on a quarterly basis. We'll be putting some annual information for FY11 and 10 out there this summer, and then hopefully during the year we'll be able to get that adjusted where we can update that quarterly. Delivering what we promise has been the consistent theme with the council on completing the projects that we've initiated and the promises that have been made and the trust that's been placed in the city and the investment from the citizens and completing important projects like Maps for Kids. That's planned to be completed in 2013. The sports facilities projects will be completed in this next fiscal year. The 2007 GO bond program will be going on for many years, but completing that and keeping the emphasis on that, and we'll talk about some of that and how much we're planning to spend this next year from the GO bond program. The MAPS 3 projects now, the office is staffing up and shifting over as the MAPS office is handling both the MAPS for Kids projects and MAPS 3, and that's included within the budget. Responsiveness to records requests, there is a position that's added in the clerk's office to help us to be timely in our responses to requests for records from citizens and from the, and actually even internally as we're trying to get records to be able to use for operations, but the focus is primarily from the outside as citizens make records requests. Timeliness of building inspections, there are a couple of positions that are added to help us to be more timely in our building inspections there's a plumbing inspector and electrical inspector that's added in development services to help us to be more timely with those inspections. Looking at sustainable financial model, we did have received confirmation from Moody's and Standards & Poor's of our AAA rating, bond rating, and that's really important. One of the most important factors they talk about is strong financial management. That really starts with the City Council and the financial priorities or the financial policies that are set in the way that we manage our finances, and it's a compliment that we consistently get when the rating agencies give their ratings and provide their support for why they're rating this way. Is conservative financial management is one really important area. We did increase reserve levels in our financial policies in this past year so that in the general fund, the top end of that range, we go from 8 to 15, and at that top end at 15% leaves us about 2% or about 2 months worth of revenue from the general fund. So it's not an excessive amount of reserve, but it's definitely a prudent amount and it's consistent with recommended practices. Improving the flexibility in our investments is another area of trying to make sure that we're developing financially sustainable model that will allow us to be able to continue to receive the best investments that we can, best return on our investments, while protecting the security of those funds. The ambulance service membership program was a big step for the city that provided a service for our citizens that prevented them from having anyone who participates in the program, that anyone in their household is prevented from having any out-of-pocket expenses for ambulance service. That's continuing, and it took a burden, provided that additional service, provided a dedicated source helping to fund ambulance service, and took that burden off of the general fund to allow the general fund to address other priorities. Revenue enforcement. In the finance department, we do have some positions being added to help with revenue enforcement and the collection of delinquent revenues, and the primary focus initially on that is going to be with sales tax and making sure that we're working with the tax commission to try to help identify and to be able to address vendors that are delinquent in remitting their sales tax revenues. And we do expect to get additional sales tax revenue as a result of those efforts. Infrastructure development is something that consistently in the citizen survey has been a priority, where the citizens are rating us lower on the condition of the streets, and they rate as the highest priority by far, being able to address the condition of our streets, and that's something that we continue in our investment within infrastructure, not with streets, but that definitely is a priority for us. Planning to spend $78 million this next year from the GO bond program on infrastructure and other development. There are some facilities that are included in that, but the primary focus is on infrastructure. Project 180, one of the things you will see as we go through this is the interrelationship between a lot of our priorities as well. A lot of the projects and the programs and services we provide address multiple priorities, and we've listed those out. And Project 180 and MAPS 3 are consistent themes in several categories. But the Project 180 is helping to improve the streets downtown with the GO bond funds and TIF funds. The utilities department, although the utilities, and Jim was talking about this earlier, the relationship with our city departments and the trusts, most of the utility capital improvements are actually done through the Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust. We list those here because even though it's handled in that trust budget, it's an important priority for the city and for the citizens to be able to maintain that infrastructure that we have. We have very high ratings that we get from our citizens on water and wastewater service, but we want to make sure that we maintain that. Public transportation, it's one of the areas that really you'd like to say that we're adding service, and in this case, what we're doing is preserving service. It's really an amazing thing that we went through a recession time and did not reduce public transportation services. One of the things that helped us with that is in this past year, this current year, we were able to use some Recovery Act funding to be able to sustain services that otherwise would have had to be reduced. Coming into this year's budget, going into FY12, we're going to have to replace that funding, so there's an additional $2 million from the general fund to increase the payment from the general fund for public transportation services to about $12 million, and so that is included. It's a significant investment, but it allows us to be able to maintain those services. MAPS 3 investment in public transportation, there's been a lot of discussion about that and how that's going to be bringing enhancements to the downtown area particularly, and also allow us to be able to do some other transit amenities, one of which has been discussed is a downtown transit hub. The Downtown Alternatives Analysis Study is expected to be completed early in FY12. Economic development obviously is critical to helping us to support the growth within our economy and within our city, and helps to support growth within our revenues. The Oklahoma City Economic Development Trust and the Economic Development Programs continue to be supported through the general fund, and this year, actually it's general fund support to the Oklahoma City Economic Development Trust. We do have the $75 million in gold bonds that helps to fund the strategic investment program. There are 3 announcements just recently that have been made that are going to bring 700 jobs to Oklahoma City as a result of this strategic investment program. Yes, sir.
A question. I made a comment that the general fund supported the Economic Development Trust. Approximately what is the dollar value of that support?
Actually, the positions are funded in the general fund, and the Economic Development Trust provides support back in the general fund. So they're funded in the general fund, but the majority of that is in the Economic Development Trust reimbursing the general fund. I don't have the exact amount on that. I think we can look in the city manager's office. There's actually an economic development program that identifies how much that total investment is, and so we can look at that within the budget book, and I can get that information for you.
I'm just curious as to how much the general fund is burdened by the Economic Development Trust. And burdened by that, I mean dollars that aren't recovered from the TIF
Right.
or the gold bond.
I don't know the exact amount, but I know it's a very small amount by comparison to the total cost of the program. There is some that's there that's not fully recovered, but the majority of that cost is recovered. The Outlet Mall opening in August of 2011 wasn't part of the strategic investment program, but is supported through the economic development program, and is a big investment in retail as we're trying to bring more retail into the city, and that's going to be opening in August of 2011. Again, we mentioned Project 180 and MAPS 3, and their investment, really the next slides we talk about are quality of life, but improving the quality of life in Oklahoma City and in the downtown area helps to bring businesses in. And we've seen many examples of that. These are some of the examples, but the quality of life is an important part of that. And so we also mentioned Project 180 and MAPS 3 in economic development. With the quality of life, implementation of those projects for MAPS 3 is going to be an important part. We are starting to staff up on the projects to be able to do project management. And really it's a challenge as we have these new opportunities to invest in other areas like Project 180 and MAPS 3. For the Public Works Department, it's important that we staff to be able to do project management on those specifically, and we're adding some positions this year in Public Works to be able to address project management in MAPS 3 as we're beginning to staff up for that. The importance there is that we don't want to take emphasis away from the GO Bond program and continuing the momentum that we have in the GO Bond program and making those infrastructure improvements. So there are a couple of project management positions added in Public Works to address the implementation of MAPS 3. In Project 180, the streetscapes, the parks, the bike lanes that are being brought to downtown definitely help to improve the quality of life. The GO Bond program, investment in parks and trails that will be ongoing in this next year. The Myriad Gardens, if you're down at the Arts Festival anytime wandering around there, it was just amazing to see how many people were going in and enjoying the Myriad Gardens and what just a beautiful place that is, and it really adds to the quality of life, not only in downtown, but for all of our citizens. The appearance of the city, we are enhancing code enforcement. It's a small step that we're making, but we are making some, adding a position in code enforcement to help us with responses to complaint-based inspections, as well as being more proactive in our inspections that we're doing with the quality of the appearance of our neighborhoods. In Parks and Recreation, investment in the aquatics program, they are adding in a coordinator to help with the management of the aquatics program. We do also have city funding that we discussed a few weeks ago with the council and got direction on this with funding the Woodson Specialty Pool and the Menace Lakeview. Since our discussion, our plan was to have discussions about whether or not we could fund the Mecklenburg Pool. All three of those actually had been slated for closure last year and were funded this year with commitments of donations. As we had the discussion, we did fund Woodson and Menace Lakeview within the budget, but Chesapeake has stepped forward and said they would again fund the Mecklenburg Pool, and so we're going to have that pool funded again this year through the donation from Chesapeake.
So all pools that were open last year will be open again this year.
And in the plan, as directed by the council again a few weeks ago, was to get started on the Menace Lakeview spray ground, and I believe the intent is that that will be constructed in this next fiscal year. Public education is something that has come up with the council strategic priorities. It's come up in discussions even last week at the council workshop of how important that is to Oklahoma City and to our citizens. The Maps for Kids program continues its work in completing the capital projects and the investment through the Maps for Kids sales tax. The plan is to have these projects completed in fiscal year 2013. The Maps for Kids office, or the MAPS office, is also expanding. Now it's going to be handling the MAPS 3 projects, but it's expanded as well in the past year and is adding a position this year to help supervise the project management on the school bond projects and helping the school with completing those projects as well.
Excuse me, will the school board reimburse us for the cost of managing those programs?
I actually believe they're providing 2 project managers, and they're actually using the Maps for Kids funds to help provide for that supervision.
That's correct. It's being Maps for Kids funds is being used for the administration of all the bond projects. So it's not any expenses out of general fund by the city.
Okay.
So there are some additional Maps for Kids sales tax dollars which we'll be using to have city staff administer the school's GEO bond project.
Okay, and that won't impact adversely the construction of our schools?
I say no. It really appears that we're going to be in fine shape on Maps for Kids, although the last couple 3-bid openings have not been overly favorable to us, but we still believe we've got enough contingency funds to get to the end.
Government efficiency is an area that's been important to the council, and really when we first started talking about this a few years ago, the focus was in the metro area of shared services, or where we have duplication services between different communities or entities with the county and the city or other suburbs in the city, and that's been a primary focus. We do have many areas that we have shared service. Some examples are here with public safety mutual aid agreements that have been in existence for a long time between the fire and police departments with other communities where they share services. The ambulance service program, where we're providing services through IMSA, that shares not only with Tulsa between the Eastern and Western Division, but also communities within the metropolitan area are now participating in that program and have those ambulance services. Shared communication systems, we have several communities in the metropolitan area that are using our radio system and have technology support on their radio system, and so they pay to reimburse us for our costs, and they're sharing in a part of the cost of the system and the technology support, but also being able to share in those services. The regional water supply is an important issue that definitely is going to ultimately be a regional solution for the metropolitan area. Additional to that, we expanded the discussions of the county. You all expanded the discussion this past year to make sure that we're focusing not only on how we can be more efficient in sharing services within the metropolitan area, but within our own organization. And departments continually are looking for ways that they can improve efficiency in the way that they operate. It doesn't always happen just within the budget, but we do have some examples where there are some efficiencies that are being gained in the budget. A lot of times, the limitations of the budget force us in a position of going out and finding more efficient ways to operate. This year, we are able to add back that second shift that we had previously for fleet services, and it allows us to be able to repair some vehicles and work on vehicles and do preventive maintenance at times when they're not needed for the regular work schedule. And so you can take them offline at times that they aren't needed for work, and it helps us to be more efficient in making sure those vehicles are available when they're needed.
That was a cut we made last year because we needed to make a cut. We needed to save some money. It was not we cut a lot of things that we wish we couldn't cut. That's a real good example. That did not make us more efficient, but we did need to make some cuts last year that hurt us in some of those types of areas.
Leadership for the telecommunications enhancements, and there's many positions that are being added back for the IT department. One of the areas that we're looking at with telecommunications is helping to provide leadership in the management and the way that we use these telecommunications resources. There's so many different ways, whether it's in telephone communications and how we use those, or the handheld devices that are available and what we can do to be able to operate more efficiently. And this will provide some leadership to let us be more strategic in the way that we're using those resources. Central records management, there's an archivist position that's proposed in the city clerk's office. They're working on a grant application that will help to fund a part of this to help us evaluate our central records management, or having central records management. Right now we have many different ways that we store records. I'm sure that we're not maximizing every opportunity that we could have for electronic storage. We try to do that where we can, but we believe that central records management could help us to be able to be more efficient in the way we store our records and making sure they're accessible when they're needed, whether by the public or the media or within the city departments. The fire department is adding 2 administrative support positions, and the chief will talk about that this morning. But basically, again, it was some of the cuts that we had to make in the mid-year. Actually, in FY10, they eliminated several administrative positions. And the reality is there are administrative functions that have to be accomplished, and when we do that, we have to rely on uniform positions often to be able to cover some of those responsibilities. This will reduce our reliance upon having to require the use of uniform positions to do some of the administrative functions. Citizen safety, as I mentioned before, is our last priority that we're mentioning, definitely not our least. There's significant investment that's being made in public safety in this budget. One of the things that Jim talked about when he was introducing the budget was 100 public safety positions that we relied upon. The MAPS 3 use tax as a temporary source. Everyone recognized that it wasn't a good decision last year or during this year that we wanted to make, but it was one to preserve those services we needed to make. The council made it very clear to us that it was a highest priority to get off of that one-time temporary revenue, and that's one of the first steps that we're making in this budget. It's an $8 million increase in the general fund to bring all 100 positions back off the MAPS 3 use tax, in addition to the direction that the council gave in this fiscal year to take the additional revenue we have received in sales tax and to reimburse the MAPS 3 use tax fund for those expenses, for those $8 million in expenses that were absorbed this year. And so that fund will be made whole in terms of being able to be available for the plan right now to be able to use it for public safety capital replacement. It is also being used to help with the implementation of the MAPS 3 projects, but the additional funding was intended to be able to set aside for public safety fleet replacement and some of the communication systems replacements, and it'll be able to restore that to have that available. We are, as we discussed previously, and as you accepted the grant a few weeks ago, going to have 29 additional firefighters, and actually they've got those started in the recruit class, but 29 additional firefighters. They're added with a grant from the Department of Homeland Security that will fund those positions for 2 years. There's no requirement the city takes that over, but if we're going to continue that level of service, then in 2 years, we're going to have to be prepared to absorb those costs. But this will help to add those back in this year without adding an additional financial burden in the general fund.
Greg, how about how much is that additional cost in 2 years, your estimate?
It will probably be in the neighborhood of $2 million.
So that's with some escalation in there for
the next couple of years, because they'll still be on the lower end of the pay scale, so somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million, we believe. And we are restoring within the general fund the 22 uniform positions that were eliminated this last year. They're added back to various programs. They're not going back exactly where they were all eliminated. Some are, but not all of them go back to exactly the areas that they were eliminated, and the chief will talk about those in more detail.
Actually, we're not restoring. We're recommending to you that they be restored.
I'm sorry.
Just very clear on that.
When I say we and are doing this, we're doing it in the proposed budget that's being presented to you. I apologize for that. Now, looking at our revenue overview, the operating budget, as Jim had talked before, takes in our operations and the day-to-day services that our citizens see, and the revenues that help to support those. You can see that 58% of those are by taxes. The majority of that is sales tax. By far, the majority of that is sales tax. Use tax is really a sales tax on goods purchased outside of the state, brought into the city for use. And so that makes up the majority of that. There are a few other taxes that are included in that, and we'll talk about those in the general fund, but the majority of it is sales and use tax. The fees and charges section is 22.8%, and that has many different fees. One of the things that you see that, and we'll talk about the transfers in a minute, but like the water and wastewater fees, some of those fees that are supported through a trust actually don't show up in these categories, but some of the fees, like, because they'll show up in a transfer category because they're collected within the trust and then transferred to the city for the operations. Some of the fees that do show up here that are outside of the general fund are the stormwater fee. The stormwater utility fee is collected and is shown here, as well as the ambulance membership fee as a part of these fees and charges. We do have fines included. That's actually within the general fund, and some of the other fees that we'll talk about with the general fund, like building permits and business licenses, those are all included in this category. Transfers in, as I mentioned, we do get the water and wastewater utility fees, the solid waste management fees, the fees that the airports collects. Those are all collected within those trusts, those individual trusts, and then transferred to the city, and that's that significant transfer that you see there. That transfer is the funding coming in to support those enterprise operations where we're supporting line maintenance and we're supporting the airport services that are provided. We support the solid waste management services and the garbage collection services through this city fund. Other revenues 1.7%, and then fund balance is 1.2% of the budget. Looking at the general fund revenues, the sales tax is the largest revenue source that we have at almost 52%. That's up slightly from this past year, the budget for this past year, and that's something that generally, our goal is to try to reduce reliance on sales tax, but when the sales tax is growing like it has in this past year, generally that proportion will increase a little bit. We did have some increase in use tax. We had some increase in fines that also helped to offset that. So it's just a little bit of an increase. It's not significant. It goes up to about 52%. It goes up to 51.6%, and it was a little over 51% in this previous year. Other taxes category, the largest portion of that is the use tax, and the use tax is about it's about $33 million is use tax, and makes up the largest portion of that. We also have in there the motor fuels tax, the alcohol tax, commercial vehicle tax, the tobacco tax are all included within this other taxes category in the general fund. Franchise fees are the fees that are paid by the utilities to pay for the use of city rights-of-way, and that's the cable franchises, electric franchises, natural gas. Those are all included in franchise fees, and you can see it's about 11% of the budget. Fines is 6.3% of the budget, and that's fines and court costs, all those costs that are related to those fines, and that's about $23 million going into the FY12 budget. And that has seen a bump this year, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Next year, we're not expecting as much growth, but we have seen some good growth in that this year with some overtime programs and some changes that the police department has made in operationally and how they're addressing traffic enforcement. Miscellaneous revenue is 13.4%. It has many different other services and charges, like our charges for project management services that are funded through the general fund and then reimbursed by the GO bond program and MAPS 3 and Project 180 and some of these other projects reimburse the general fund for those costs. We have reimbursements we get for federal overtime programs for public safety services. There's many different things that are included within the miscellaneous category. Transfers is 5.7% of the budget, and the majority of the transfers portion there is from the wage adjustment that's provided through the public safety sales tax funds, the police and fire sales tax funds, make a transfer back to the general fund to help cover some of the cost of wage adjustments that have taken place since the inception of the 3/4 cent sales tax in 1989. That's about $18 million in the FY12 budget.
Can I ask a question on the fuel tax?
Yes, sir.
Has the price increase from roughly $3 a gallon to almost $4 a gallon had an impact on our fuel tax?
It actually doesn't. We get a really small portion of that. We only get about $1 million a year. That's a collection from the state, and they reimburse. They provide some of that back to cities and counties. And
is that tax based on a gallon? Or?
That's exactly right. It's a per unit tax, and so when the price fluctuates, really, as the price goes up really high, and if people start using fewer gallons, you actually see a decline in that revenue source. For us, it stayed pretty steady at around $1 million a year.
Thank you.
May I ask a question? Earlier, you said that one of the goals is for the city to reduce its reliance on sales tax. What other sources of revenue would make up for that reduction in?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that are out there. You know, sales tax, the Oklahoma law is unique. We're the only state that has, where cities are solely reliant upon sales tax for operations. We don't get property tax for operations. We don't get income tax for operations. We're solely based upon sales tax. The thought process is that we need to make sure that we have the other revenues, some franchise fees, the fines and forfeitures, the fees on building permits, and some fees on some of our other operations to do that. The rating agencies frown upon having too big a piece of that pie being part of sales tax, and the reason is, one is that sales tax is more volatile,
right.
But then there's also been recent challenges on the sales tax base, whether it's been internet, through sales tax exemptions that have been placed out there by the state. There are reasons why sales tax is not always the most stable. It served us well. It served us well during good times, and we're focused on that. We just don't want to make sure that we're overly reliant upon sales tax as we go forward.
Well, so do we have a plan to increase those other sources of fees? I guess we'll hear about that at some point.
We do look and try to keep those things in check. One of the things we've done a couple of years ago is that we had a study done on our other fees and license fees and those type of things to make sure that they keep in step with our costs of providing the services related thereto. We also look at the court systems to make sure that those costs are reasonable and within the realms, the constraints we're given on court fees, so that we can recover those costs also. So we just try to be diligent upon making sure that we're up to date on those other fees.
Okay, one last question. The overall increase, it appears, in sales tax revenue is less than 1%, but it seemed like during the previous months, at times we were showing well in excess of a 10% growth. So are these two different numbers, or as we look at a year-to-year?
Yeah. What we're showing is we took out the storm, and it's a 4% increase.
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
Yeah, we took out the storm. Oh, and then dropped that base and made a 4% increase from there.
Okay.
Is what we're projecting forward.
Right.
So because of that storm had an impact, so it does look like it's a 1.5% or so, but in essence, that's the rationale for getting, and the 4% was the number that was suggested to us by our economists that we work with, based upon the national trends and state trends.
Great, thank you.
I think you all have covered this next slide pretty well. Did a really good job, too. The sales tax, and we'll look at a few of our assumptions that we've made. Jim explained it exactly. We have seen very strong growth this year. Normal sales tax growth, or our long-term average sales tax growth, is about 4%. And we have seen right now, we're looking at about 12.5% on this year as we've recovered from the recession. We do believe some of that is tied into the storms, and you can see we're backing out about $6 million, but there's still, if you back out $6 million, there's still good, strong growth that's there outside of the storms. And so that's part of the rebound that we've seen. Definitely the construction that we're seeing right now that's going on downtown and in other areas is helping to contribute to that. And so that, those are all factors that are contributing. As we looked at it next year when we back out the storms and then we use a 4% growth factor, it still comes out, if you look at it, it's just a little less than 1% growth that we're looking at sales tax, and that's because of discounting for the storms. Looking at our sales tax, and you can see again here, our FY11 estimate, it's about $186 million. We're looking at almost $188 million for next year. It doesn't look like very much of a change, but again, it's because of that adjustment that we're making in the sales tax. One of the important things, as I mentioned before, is that the average sales tax growth that we've seen over a long period of time, sometimes it's a little higher and sometimes it's a little lower, but it averages out to about 4% per year that we can expect from sales tax growth. When you look at what we did in 10 in response to the recession, and sales tax dropped, you can see that we dropped there, and it was about 7% that we dropped. Right now, as I mentioned, we're looking at about 12% growth going into the end of this fiscal year. When you look between FY09 and what we're projecting in FY12, that's about a 4% difference. So while we have come back and it's much better, it's still not like we're back to where we would have been had we stayed on the normal pace of about 4% a year. We'd have been about 12.5% higher as opposed to about 4% higher than what we had in FY09. So It's definitely done better than we expected, but it's still not fully back to, when you have a recession, you take a step back and then you begin to build off of that again. And we've had a very good year this year for a lot of different reasons. But again, we're moving slowly and aren't able fully to restore all of the services that have been reduced over the last couple of years. Some of the other general fund revenue assumptions really stay fairly close to what we've been seeing in long-term trends. The projected growth in use tax is actually a little bit lower than what we normally see, but we've seen such strong growth this past year. It's a really volatile source. It's not nearly as consistent. I mean, the sales tax moves with the economy very closely. Use tax moves with the economy, but it can also have a lot of other changes, and you can see significant fluctuations where you'll see double-digit growth, and you'll see a decline the next year when the economy is still going strong. So it's not quite as consistent as what we see with the sales tax. We're projecting about 5% growth next year. Franchise fees are at about 3.2% growth, consistent with long-term growth trends that we've seen. The overall licenses, permits, and fees is basically flat. The biggest reason for this is the largest portion of this is building permits and building-related permits. The building permits that we have, revenue that we received from the construction of the Devon Tower was basically a one-time hit that we received this year. Next year, we're believing we're going to have growth, but we have to discount for what we received from Devon this year. And so we believe the growth that we'll see next year will make up for that, but we're expecting it to be flat, basically, by comparison to what we're going to receive in the current year. Fines and forfeitures, like I mentioned before, we have seen really strong growth at about 11% in this current year. We're expecting about just a little less than 1% growth going to next year. We had seen multiple years of decline in our fine and court fee revenue, and now this is, or the citations written, we actually had made some adjustments in court fees a few years ago that helped to stabilize that. But we had seen a decline in this last year, a little more than a year. There's been an increase in the activity number of citations that have been issued. And so we're expecting that to stabilize and be about 1%, but stay at the same level. And we'll talk about one of the grant programs or federal reimbursement programs that was provided to help with strategic traffic enforcement that we're going to continue to fund. It was available through Recovery Act funds this past year, and we're going to fund that through the general fund, or we have that proposed in the general fund budget for this next year. Overall general fund revenues are expected to grow at about 1.7% this next year, over the actual revenues that will be collected in FY11. The total general fund budget, as we talked about before, is about $364 million. Looking at the expenditure budget, public safety, this is breaking it down by service area. Public safety is 51% of our operating budget. Public services is 31%, and you'll see when we look at the general fund that public services is a smaller portion and public safety is a larger portion in the general fund. The primary issue is the enterprise funds or in the other operating funds, water, wastewater, solid waste, stormwater, airports, and that those are included in the other operating and aren't shown in the general fund. That also includes the public works departments, the planning department, and the development services department. And then the funding we have also for public transportation services. Those operations are funded primarily out of the Central Oklahoma Transportation and Parking Authority, but we do have a payment that comes from the general fund to help support those services. Culture and recreation is 12.6% of the budget. This includes our Parks and Recreation Department. It includes the operating portion of the hotel-motel tax that helps to support promotion of convention and tourism in Oklahoma City. It also includes the zoo sales tax. General government is about 5.6% of the budget, and that includes all of our internal services, from the city manager's office, city auditors, municipal counselor's office, the finance department, the personnel department, all those services, general services, fleet services, and information technology, those internal services that help support operations of the other departments. In the general fund, as I mentioned, public safety is 64% of the general fund budget. This is very similar to the percentage that it was in this past year, and is still a very significant investment. It does include the 100 positions coming back from MAPS 3 use tax, as well as the additional 22 police officer positions that are proposed in the budget. Now, it doesn't have the 29 firefighter positions in this portion of the budget because it's actually reflected in the grant funds. General government is 9.6%. As I mentioned before, the public services is the Public Works Department, the Planning Department, Development Services, and it has the transfer of the payment from the general fund that goes to COTPA to fund public transportation services at about $12 million. Culture and Recreation in the general fund is only the Parks and Recreation Department. Looking at the summary by expenditure category, you can see that personal services makes up the largest portion of our budget at 73%. The other services category has our payments for internal services like information technology and fleet services, print shop, risk management. Those are actually funded through internal service funds outside of the general fund, but then we pay a chargeback for those services through the general fund. This also includes payments for utilities, for water and gas and electric, for city operations and city facilities, and then includes other contracted services. Supplies budget's at 2%, and then the transfers is at 4.5%. The transfers there, one of the transfers that's included there is actually the transfer for, and we'll see an increase that's going on there, is for capital improvements, for general fleet replacement, and for facility capital maintenance for city facilities. Within the general fund, we're moving from originally what was a $333 million budget. It's actually been amended a couple of times, and this year it's a little bit higher in this current year, but moving to a $364 million budget. So what are some of the changes that we're seeing, significant changes? This is the MAPS 3 use tax funding, the $8 million that's proposed to move from the MAPS 3 use tax into the general fund is included within the increases. Capital funding that I mentioned, we're increasing by $2 million, and this really is just restoring it to what it was at the time that we reduced capital funding in response to the recession. Health insurance, this is both for for current employees, active employees, as well as retirees, is going up $3.7 million. Medicare Part D, we get a reimbursement from Medicare for some of our pharmaceutical expenses for the retiree health program. In the past few years, we've been putting that back into the OPEB trust, the Other Post-Employment Benefits Trust, that provides for retiree health benefits to help us address that OPEB liability. In this current year, in FY11, we took that transfer out and just left that within the general fund, which we can do that, but we left that in the general fund just to help reduce the impact on services. We're wanting to add that back and proposing to put that back to putting that into funding future retiree health insurance costs. And that's about $1 million. The payment for COTPA is going up by $2.3 million. Part of that is to cover the Lost Recovery Act funds, and part of that is to help cover some of their costs that they also have with insurance and employee costs, increased employee costs. Fuel budget's going up by $1.3 million, and this is one area that's we have to be careful with, and we have to make sure that we're protecting some contingency in case fuel prices continue to rise like they have been. If they continue to increase more, we're going to have some additional funding for fuel. We believe we can fund any adjustments that are made within reason through our contingency if we have to. Right now, we've increased our fuel budget by about $1.3 million. Technology maintenance, this is where we pay maintenance contracts for our technology systems. Most of this is supporting the public safety information systems. A lot of those were added through the public safety capital tax from several years ago. And most of this increase is tied into continuing support and maintenance for those systems. Other program improvements, and we've discussed some of this in some of our briefings, is about $6 million is what we're proposing right now. And we're going to talk about some of those. The departments, as they make presentations, not all the departments will make presentations, but as we have department presentations, they'll talk about those in a lot more detail. But I'm just going to go over those real quickly with some of the changes that are being proposed and some of the costs associated with those changes.
So before you move on to that slide, on the capital improvements,
yes, sir.
Does that include the contribution to the street and alley fund?
No, sir, it does not.
Is there going to be a contribution in this?
In the proposed budget, there's no additional contribution proposed for street and alley. Right now, all of the street, there is some funding still in the street and alley fund where there was some fund balance from years past that can still be used. Most of the other projects then are funded through, or all the other projects are funded through the GO bond program. Some of the program improvements that make up that $6 million that I was talking about are two positions within the city clerk's office to enhance responses to records requests and then to help begin to focus on developing a strategy for a central records management program. If we're successful in getting the grant that they're going to apply for, that'll help pay for part of that expense. In development services, I mentioned before, improving the response times on building inspections. We also have the enhanced code enforcement that we talked about before, as well as some enhancement on the animal shelter, a customer service representative in the animal shelter to be able to help with intakes and adoptions of animals and to handle that workload with the number of people that come through the shelter and bring animals in and are adopting animals every day. The finance department, this is the, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
On the city clerk, is the, did you say 2 positions?
Yes, sir.
All the positions that was affected from the budget cut, have they been restored in the city?
Yes, we had one position that was eliminated from the budget cut, and then we're also adding a records archivist position. The revenue enforcement function that we talked about before in the finance department, this includes the cost of the function, but as well as some one-time costs to help with doing some remodel in the offices to be able to make room for those additional employees. So it's the cost of the additional employees to do the revenue enhancement or enforcement, as well as those one-time costs. In the fire department, we talked about the enhanced administrative support. And right now, we're looking primarily at we're looking only at the program improvements in the general fund that are tied to that $6 million. That's the reason the 29 firefighter positions don't show up here, because they're in the grant fund and not in the general fund.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
On the revenue enforcement, the new efforts in that area, will we be able to identify going forward how much additional revenue was generated by this department as opposed to just a general increase in sales tax revenue? I mean, can we specify due to their efforts they were able to
Yes, we will.
recover
And there are some limitations with that, because sometimes there's remittances that were being provided already with that, and so you have to, being able to single that out, we believe we'll be able to narrow that down to an approximation of what's being generated. Right now, all we did was put in an additional $200,000 to cover the full cost. We believe we'll actually be able to recognize more than that, but we'll be able to report on that.
Yes, thank you.
In the General Services Department, we talked about adding the second shift at the Fleet Maintenance Center. And then also we're enhancing the fuel management program. This is really just management. We have many employees, police officers are one of those that they have fuel cards, and we have to go through and reconcile those bills when they come in, and there's just hundreds of bills that are flowing in. This will help to ensure that we've got proper controls internally to be able to reconcile those and make sure, ensure the accuracy of those bills. Information technology, there's 7 positions that are outlined here. There's a lot of different areas. We talked about the strategic management for telecommunications. We've had several areas because of the budget cuts in the last few years where we'd have a division manager that's trying to also manage a program. This will add some leadership there in database management for that, database team management. In mobile data and radio repair, and that's where we're doing the radio system support. A lot of that is tied in with public safety with either handheld radios or the mobile data computers and mobile data equipment that we have, or the communications equipment that we have on the vehicles. And we're adding the supervisor there. We had one position that they were trying to supervise between 2 different locations because of covering for the budget cuts, and this is going to restore some services there and some supervision in that area. Financial and human resource system reporting to provide reports to help the departments and help finance and personnel in managing our finances and our human resources. Enhanced mobile communications installations is actually a radio technician position to help with doing the installations when we're preparing vehicles for operation, that when we get new vehicles in and changing out radio and technology equipment. And then enhancement on our help desk. We had to eliminate some positions just to balance the budget, and this is putting some more positions back onto the help desk. In the municipal counselor's office, there are 2 assistant municipal counselors added. One is added in civil litigation to help with the workload there, and one is added to help support AQUA, and will be paid by a transfer or reimbursement from, actually it's going to be paid directly through AQUA, and the position is in the municipal counselor's office. In municipal courts, we're adding a couple of positions to our front desk to be able to help with the workload there. This, again, is in trying to restore some of the services that were eliminated during the recession. Also improving the clearance of warrants with adding a deputy marshal position. In Parks and Recreation, additional funding is added for the Myriad Gardens operations and maintenance. With those improvements that have been made, we actually reduced some of the costs in the past year because of the closure while it was being constructed. This is restoring some of those, as well as adding back to the costs of the Myriad Gardens with increased utility costs. There are a lot more plantings and a lot more water features and all that have to be maintained, and this is providing for that. This enhances the aquatics program, as we talked about, the management of the aquatics program. We do also provide a position for the recreation administrative support and geo bond program support that's managed, the portion that's managed through the Parks Department, and a project management position to help with getting Parks geo bond projects completed. The Menace Lakeview, Woodson, and Mecklenburg pools that we mentioned earlier are included in the proposed budget. We have facility maintenance and event coordination at the Civic Center. Both of these were funded by reducing other costs in this area, reduce some part-time costs and some contracting costs to help us to be more efficient really in the way that we're handling these services. We tried to go with a contractor this past year with facility maintenance, and they found that really they need to have someone on staff that can be there and be available when they have events going on and all, and be more flexible. And so these are a couple of additions that are being made there. In the personnel department, there's a physician's assistant that's being added. The total cost of the position is actually more than this, but they made some reduction in part-time because previously we had one full-time physician assistant, which is the occupational health manager, and then we also had a part-time physician assistant. This will provide 2 full-time physician assistants to help with providing for some of these services that are outlined here, as well as providing a few services to other municipalities that we get reimbursed for the costs on those. There's just some of those smaller municipalities that can't afford the services themselves or can't afford to provide the services internally, and it's expensive to contract that, so we're able to share some of those services there as well. That's just getting underway, but we have been able to do some of that too. In the police department, the chief will go through the details of the budget, but it's proposing to add 22 uniform positions back in the police department at a cost of $1.5 million. There's enhanced fingerprint examination is also added. A position is added to help with that program. The two overtime grants, one for gang enforcement, one for traffic enforcement, were actually funded through Recovery Act grants, and that's proposed to be replaced with the general fund in both these areas at a little over $500,000. Public transportation and parking, we talked before in that summary about $2.3 million more that's being paid to help with covering the Recovery Act funds as well as some of the increased costs there. But in addition to that, there's improved safety training. They have one safety training officer. This is adding an analyst to help them with reducing injuries and being able to deal with safety issues related to the operation of the vehicles and with customer safety as well. The Public Works Department, we're adding street materials, street maintenance materials to help with providing the materials that are needed for the pothole patching, crack sealing programs. This really is just bringing the budget up to, we've had to use some contingency funds in the last couple of years because some of the weather issues that we've had a significant number of potholes and repairs that have had to be made, and this brings the budget up to where we've been spending in the past couple of years.
And we've also had an increase in asphalt prices recently.
Traffic engineering services are enhanced. This is really replacing a position that's being moved over to be dedicated for the implementation and management of the intelligent traffic system. And that's the system that's going to link through Wi-Fi the different traffic signals throughout the city at main intersections throughout the city. The improved traffic sign maintenance to help us with replacing traffic signs according to federal standards that have been issued, and make sure as we're replacing those signs we're meeting those standards. And then increasing the capacity to support the MAPS 3 projects. I mentioned that before. It's a couple of project management positions. And as those projects begin to increase and the MAPS for Kids projects are being completed, we'll be able to shift over some of the existing project managers that are working on MAPS for Kids over into MAPS 3. So not all of those will have to be an increase. Some of that will be a shift as we transition from MAPS for Kids into MAPS 3.
Now, will that be reimbursed to the city?
Yes,
from
sir.
MAPS funds?
Yes, sir.
That comes from the MAPS 3 use tax.
Right.
MAPS,
Yes.
Now, MAPS 3 sales tax, the use tax. Okay.
And that's one of the areas.
excuse me, the $135,000 up there will be repaid to the city.
Yes.
So it's
Yes,
not
that's
really a
correct.
burden on the general fund.
It is not a burden on the general fund, but it's in addition to for the budget. That's correct.
I wanted to take a few minutes, if I could, and I know this is a little bit more boring. I know, I can tell. It's not quite as exciting as the Thunder, but we're doing our best, you know. We did want to take some time because we have had criticism in the past that, man, your budget book's over 600 pages. It's just so much information. You know, how could someone possibly go through this? And the idea isn't to overwhelm people with information. It's try to provide information to help people understand what's included in the budget, whether it's through elected officials or boards and commissions that are out there, or if we have our citizens looking at this, to be able to see the information that's there. And so I just wanted to take a couple of minutes and look at a few of the sections here. The introduction section is where I wanted to start. If you can look at, I think we'll start on page number 5. Just look at a few of the areas here, and if there's any questions that you have along the way as you're reviewing this, something that doesn't make sense or you need some additional information, please let us know. We'll be glad to provide any information you need to help you as you're evaluating the budget, making decisions about the final budget. The message from the city manager is on page 5, and that's several pages, 5 or 6 pages, that just provides an overview message from the city manager of what's included in the budget and some of the decisions that were made to provide for the proposed budget. In the next section we have on page 12, it's your city budget, and this is something that Public Information has helped us produce that just provides a really quick, very high-level overview of the budget that can help a citizen sit and look at the budget real quickly. And really the introduction from the city manager, the budget message from the city manager helps to provide just a high-level overview of the plans that we have included within the budget. And so this is just an additional help with that, as well as in the next section on page 15, we have the major budget changes that are summarized for each department. So this section is kind of an executive summary. It's a lot of information still, but it tries to boil down, $900 million, tries to boil it down to a few pages that you can see what changes are being made and what is included in the budget. If you look at page 39, if you can look at page 39, this is where we have our financial summaries. And this is a financial overview that pulls together all the different funds, pulls together the operating, non-operating, general fund. And it's a way that you can look to see what's changed within the funds. It's a way that you can look to see in total what's being budgeted for each of the city funds and see what all funds are actually included within the budget. The next section on page 71 gets into the department sections. And if you want to turn to maybe page 75 there, we'll just look at the airports department section. And this really is a reference document, by and large. If you want to go and see what's changed within airports or what's changed within the Public Works Department and what's included and what's changing in the number of positions and how many positions they have and what's their budget, you can go into these sections and find this. There's a lot of information that we've added over the years that relates to performance. So on the first page there, you see you have the org chart and the department mission. In the next few pages, there are a summary of the issues, the strategies of addressing those issues, and the results measures that the department's going to use to measure success in addressing those issues. So starting on page 76 are issues, strategies, and results. Every department has this. Just helps you to see things that are important to them and things that they're facing. On page 80, you'll see that with every department, when you go through, there's a summary of major changes, again, that looks at position changes related to those major changes, and it looks at the amount, the dollar amount of those changes. The following couple of pages will deal with the expenditures and look at the expenditure budget summarized by their lines of business, look at it by funding sources that are available there, as well as changes with positions. And then the final sections of the departments will go through and look at each line of business, each program, look at the performance measures they have to track success and some of the historical information on those performance measures for each one of the departments. So that section covers several hundred pages there of each department. You can go through and look at those. Those are listed alphabetically, and if you look at the top corner of the pages, it'll have the name of the department. If you're just trying to flip through there and find a particular department, it's on the top corner of each page. If you look at page number 431, that starts our fund summary section. It goes into a summary of each individual city fund that's included in that financial summary section and talks about the overview of the revenue sources that are available to that fund, and help to fund the operations there as well as the expenditures that are included in that fund. And so that starts on page 431 there and then goes through, and you'll see that there's every one of the city funds is listed in that section. The next section is the capital budget section, and that starts on page 489. We will have this also posted, and we may already have it posted, I'm not sure, but we'll have it posted on the internet and at okc.gov, and there's a table of contents in there, and we'll have that linked. So you can just go to your table of contents, hit the link, you can go straight to that page and find exactly what you're looking for. And again, if you have any issues and looking for that, let me know, and we'll be glad to help you with information, getting information that you need. In the capital section, it includes not only the capital budgets for city departments, but also includes the trusts, the capital budgets for the trusts. And so it goes through and it looks at the capital budgets, the planned expenditures and developmental projects that are planned for FY12. The final section is the appendix section, and that just goes through some of the financial policies and the glossary of terms in that final section. And I'm sorry to bore you with that, but I want to make sure you know that our intent is for you to have all the information that you need as you're making decisions. We're not trying to hide it by providing too much information, and so I appreciate your time in looking at it.
We also want to be comprehensive. We want to make sure it's all there for anybody to see, for the press to come in, be able to take a shot at it. And I know it's a little overwhelming, but it really, if you go back 10 years or 15 years, we really have made it more customer-friendly than what it used to be. So,
Jim, I have a question about pension responsibilities going forward. How are we handling that? And if one wanted to look in the budget book and see where it was, where would you find it?
It's not in our budget book. The pension is an independent system. We do bring reports to that to the council periodically. The last actuarial just came out, by the way, and we're funded at 93%, which is really pretty good at this point in time.
Are we adding to the ongoing issue on a yearly basis, or are we able to keep up with our current situation?
Well,
in other words, next year, will it be 94 or 92, or would you expect it to be 93 again?
It depends on how we recover from some of the investments, and this is probably not my best area of expertise to respond to this, but I don't see significant changes in the past. I would be surprised if we drop below 90%. I do believe it's coming forward, and Laura's going to come back in and fill the gaps that I glossed over. We do have an ordinance in place, by the way, that says that we adjust our contributions to the retirement system to make sure that it's fully funded.
See, and there you answered the question.
Okay.
And that is the answer. We are funded right now at about 93%. It is our objective every year to fund the actuarially required contribution in order to move to 100%. That's always our target. During the years where our investments were performing very well, we were actually at about 108%. Right now, we're still in the effects of smoothing out the poor investment performance that everyone in the world experienced in 2008 and 2009. So we're still recovering from that.
Were we at higher than 93% prior to that downturn in investment?
Yes, we were at 108% prior to that. So it was the investment returns that affected that.
Okay.
But our actual assumption is 8% return, which seems a little high given our history in the last few years and even looking forward.
Actually, our current investment performance is showing that rate of return is achievable.
Over what period of time, Laura?
It's over the long term.
Yes.
When they forecast that, they do include a very long-term picture of that. But we are returning to a much better investment performance. We do have a balanced portfolio of domestic equities, international equities, some real estate, and we've adjusted that accordingly.
Is this a consideration for the rating services?
It absolutely is a consideration.
Is it a plus for us or a minus for us?
It's a plus for us right now because of the ordinance that requires us to retain that 100% goal and adjust our participation, our contribution accordingly each year. Now, the OPEB liability is not a plus for us right now, and that is separated in our system. The health insurance is separated. And because right now we're funded $12 million out of about a $460 million liability. So you can see we're very low on that. We are making changes. You may recall that we had a resolution that was passed, I believe 2 years ago now, where we're moving towards balancing the contribution between the city and the retirees. And then also we're looking at some plan changes that, if approved for the active employees, would also affect the retirees and could adjust our liability.
Okay.
The bond rating agencies probably spent about 5 minutes on the retirement system, and they probably spent, 20 minutes, 25 minutes on the OPEB liability. And our OPEB liability is not a positive. They're very pleased with our steps in that direction, but the best I can tell, that we're addressing this as well as anybody is.
Right.
It's
We did get a little bit of a finger wag at the moment, but they were pleased that we were making efforts in the direction that is positive.
But boy, they're focused on it.
Okay, I think we have a number of council people that would like to talk about. Larry and then Gary.
Just a quick question, Laura.
David.
The pension that we're talking about here is our public safety pension or just
No.
our workers?
It is not the public safety pension, because those are state-administered systems, both fire and police, who each have their own retirement system, but it's separate.
And this is the general employees, for one of a better
Right,
term.
general employees, non-uniformed
And
management
is
and AFSCME.
our plan, just so everybody knows, defined contribution or defined benefit?
It's a defined benefit program.
Gary?
Well, I'm just going to say that 93% is good. Most of the people that do the actuaries tell you anything 80 and above is acceptable, and 93 is, I think, is all the state pensions, except for the judges, would love to be at 93%, and because most of them are running in the 50 and 60% right now. So, and the years that we've been above 100 has been real good too. So I think this pension system, our general employee pension system here, is doing extremely well.
David?
Well, I'm sorry, it's not on the pension issue, but I was just going to compliment Craig and Laura and all of the finance department. I thought this budget is very well put together. For me, it was very easy to follow, and I often look at this from a reader's perspective, and I think it's one of the better projects I've seen put forth as it relates to financial matters. So I compliment Craig and Laura and Jim and all the individuals with the city who participated in this. I know it's a very complex and challenging project to go through, but I really enjoyed going through it, and it's great information to have. And as we add that to our website, I think that'll be tremendous. It'll allow all citizens to review the budget and just have a better understanding of what it takes to operate the city. So thank you very much.
Chief?
Only a CPA could enjoy going through this. I had some questions, just generally back to the presentation. On slide 19, where we showed the trend from 06 to projected through 12, it seems to me that would our projections be what they normally are, or just for this short period of time? I mean, 6 through 12 shows 1 year where it declined. I mean, surely, if you go back in time, you're going to find other years where it declines. So when it seems to me maybe our projections tend to be high, and they're based on too short a period of time. Now, I'm saying that because I'm looking at one that is very short.
And we look at far more than that. When I talk about a long-term projection, we look back at 10, 15, 20 years. We have to be careful going too far back, because there's a time period there where during the oil boom we'd have like 27% growth in our sales tax. But we've looked at long periods of time, and honestly, there have not been that many that we've had declines. We have had declines, but in the last recession coming out of like 01, 02 time frame, I think we had a 1% decline in sales tax was all that we saw. And so, we look back at a much longer period than this. We're just trying to show recently, and really you can see that in 06 to 09 is pretty indicative of some of the growth that we see normally. But periodically you're
But you wouldn't have to go back but 2 or 3 years before that, and you'd see some years that aren't quite so good.
Right.
There was a flat period in 01 and 02, absolutely, or 02 and 03.
Right.
Absolutely, sir.
And my concern is, and that you do use a longer period than that.
Yes.
So when we're looking at what we estimate for fiscal 12, it would be over more years than just the ones we've shown here. It'd be
Right.
like, you'd go
And
back
as
to
well, we're using
2000 maybe.
Right, and Jim mentioned that we're using the information also, that working with Oklahoma State University, the economists that presented at the workshop, they provide an outlook for the economy and where growth is expected to be in the economy, and they actually have projection on sales tax, and we're using that as well. So they're not just looking at the trends, they're looking at what changes they're expecting within the economy, or trends in sales tax. They're looking at what changes they're expecting within the economy, and we use that as a part of our consideration as well.
Well, that's all based on what happened. It's not based on what might happen.
Well, they're projecting what they believe will
I
happen
know,
in the
but
next
it's all,
years.
all the information they have to go in the projection is what's already happened.
And
No
I'm not,
doubt. I mean, if we get a double-dip recession,
Right.
we're going to have to make some mid-year adjustments, Mr. White. There's no doubt about that.
I understand. I have a little problem with these projections that are always based on what happened. Nobody really has, I don't mean us, but the people we rely on don't have the courage to really say, nobody predicted what, we paid lots of dollars, thousands of dollars to get these projections, and no one had the courage to tell us what might happen 2 years ago. It's because they don't use that they average out what happened for the 10 years before, and that's where they get their number.
well, and at the time, and it's a lot more complex than that, I promise. It's a lot more
Well,
complex than that and what they're doing.
I
And at
understand.
the time
I'm
that we
not
did get
trying
that,
to oversimplify it, but the net result is exactly what I said.
and it's, it's difficult when we come back to the, when we get the sales tax projections, we do use the information from them. We're trying to be conservative in the way that we're estimating so that we're not overly inflating what we're estimating or underestimating too far. And so we do try to be conservative with that.
No, I think we do the best we can with what we have, but what we have is what's already happened. That's my point. I don't think we do the best we can, but it's always going to be projected up with that as the theory. Can't be any other way. So anyway, just a concern I had about how far back we go. On slide 25, we talk about the general fund expenditures. One thing that I'd like to know is what was the impact of the federal stimulus money on where we are now? How much money are we making up that was actually a grant from the government to get us through this period of time?
Really, we used the COPS program, brought us some additional police officers, and we have now proposing that those be put in full-time. There was a operational assistance to the transit system, and so that's gone away, and that was $2 million, Craig? Mm-hmm. And so that's being built back in, is to replace that with the $2 million. And I think those may have been the majority of the operational issues, Councilman. Most of them were other special programs, like we did for the home programs and such, or for capital dollars, because we had, 20-some million dollars in capital dollars that were available to us through the ARRA.
So 5 or 6 million, was that a fair?
No, I'd say it's less than that.
What did you say?
I would say it's less than 5 or
Yeah.
6 million. It's probably more like 3 to 4 million.
3 or 4 million. And that's money we don't have to make up.
No, that's
money
money
that we are
that we have made up and put into this budget. We
We're not paying the government back for it.
No.
But it was in our operations last year,
Okay.
and so now we put it in with general fund dollars to make it whole.
But it was money that we just received.
That's correct.
Didn't send it back.
We did not send
Received
it
it.
back. We did receive it, sir.
Some of that we were able to use for the homeless shelter, West Ham
Absolutely.
campus.
Those are, that's the special projects kind of things that I...
Exactly.
And that does not include the capital money that we received, which was
No,
fairly substantial.
Overall, it was $40 to $50 million in total. Most of it, I know it was $18, $19 million in street resurfacing money alone. We got some money for the airports. We got some money for buses. We got money for special...
This budget doesn't include sending any of that money back.
That's correct.
Okay. Then on page 32, just a comment on page 32. I was struck by the gross disparity between the amount of money that it's going to take we're putting in the Myriad Gardens operation and the total amount of money we're spending on Parks and Recreation, where people actually live and use swimming pools. And I mean, at 1.2 million, you add all these others up that have money, you come up with $3 or $4 million, which is about a third of what we're spending at the Myriad Gardens. While I'm an advocate for the Myriad Gardens, it just seems to me I question the priority of spending that much money at a facility that I'm not sure reaches the needs of the taxpayer, as well as aquatics management programs and recreation and geo bond support and enhanced management of park projects and Menace Lakeview, Woodson and Mecklenburg parks and all these other matters. Just a comment, and we'll get on to that. We'll get into that when we deal with the parks. But it just seems to me, it's hard. It's kind of a hard pill to swallow when you're talking to somebody about closing their swimming pool and investing that kind of money in a downtown park.
We're not closing it. Any other comments?
Just real quickly before Craig sits down, not only congratulations on the current book, but if you'll notice the very first page, the award that they received from GFAO for their budget book last year and the way it was put together. Congratulations on that. Right.
And this does represent a lot of work from all the departments, from our budget staff, a lot of hours they spend with that and working with the department, so there's a lot of different people that contribute to this.
We talked extensively about impact fees last week, but just one question. How does Oklahoma City compare to the surrounding municipalities, Edmond, Moore, and Norman, in terms of impact fees?
I don't know the exact numbers on that. At one time, Moore didn't have any. I understand they have some impact fees now. We were always slightly under, or not slightly, we were under both Moore and Edmond. But then there are some other cities that have none. So it's a mixed bag in the metro area. Obviously, on a national standpoint, we're lower than most of the national areas. All right. Chief City is going to come up and talk to us a little bit about the police department.
I will.
Chief's got well, okay, I was recovering from the game last night. I know that it's...
Right. Usually I'm up all night, waking up off and on thinking about the budget. Last night, for some reason, I woke up thinking about three-pointers and a good defense, and never thought about the budget last night, so it took my mind off of it. Hopefully I remember enough of it now after that game to present it to you well. Our budget actually starts on page 335 of your budget book, if you want to refer to that. Of course, it has a picture of me that was taken about my first year as chief, but I don't think I've changed that much. I think I still look pretty decent there, so we haven't changed that picture. Excuse me. Lieutenant Clifton helped us work on the budget. He's actually going to work the slides. Also, my business manager, Renee Saka, I'd like to recognize her for the hard work on it. And I'll also reiterate what Craig Freeman said. Their staff, himself and their staff, we really work well together to come up with the budget. There's a lot of going back and forth on issues, and really appreciate his staff for working with us to get through it. Okay, our mission statement. It hasn't changed this year. The mission of the police department is to provide public safety services that promote a safe environment and lessen the fear of crime in Oklahoma City community so that they can experience enhanced quality of life. Our proposed budget this year, you can see that the police department's total budget is $157 million. The majority of that budget obviously is in operations, where we have the majority of our staff answering calls for service. Also investigations and public safety support. All those are primarily uniformed positions and provide our core services to our citizens. Budget sources, our general fund obviously is our largest contributor to that at 65.1%. Next largest is our dedicated public safety sales tax. It's been in existence since 1988-89 when it was passed. Okay. Our police department, we're going to go through our issues. So our LFR, leading for result issues. Police Department issues are demand for police presence and services coupled with increased scope and complexity of our investigations. They continue to grow. This was also an issue last year. Our strategies changed somewhat, continue the use of overtime programs to address high crime areas, traffic enforcement, increased presence in our entertainment districts. Additional personnel is being assigned to investigations and operations through our program improvement request, and these will be the 22 additional police officers we're putting back into the police department that were cut last year, which were included in our program improvement request. So we'll go through those individually later on in the presentation. Our strategic result is that in 2005, the police presence and services will adequately increase while maintaining the level of core services citywide. We have not had a survey in a year or so, so all of these results are contingent on the surveys that were conducted in 08 and 09, and you can see the percentages there. Our targets for 12, we've listed somewhat arbitrarily, but somewhere in between what the 08 and 9 provided, a little bit higher than what we received in 09. But feeling safe in the downtown area, feeling safe citywide, and how well citizens are satisfied with the overall police services that we provide citywide. You can see the 09 survey showed 71%. If you look nationally, that's pretty high. It's not as high as the fire department, but we're not going to compete with the fire department. They always rank higher, and that's consistent nationwide also. But 71% is extremely high with satisfaction, and we're pretty proud of that. Hopefully it'll remain the same or go higher this year. Okay. In our strategic results, you can see the percentage of priority 1 calls responded to within 9 minutes and 30 seconds. So our target remains at 90%. The 90%, as you can recall, was adopted as a result of our staffing study that we did several years ago. Our target used to be, or our standard used to be at 70%, which is what we were maintaining at the time. As a result of the study, we had concluded that we should be reaching our goal of 9 minutes and 30 seconds 90% of the time. To date, we're at 76.5, which is about 3% higher than last year. And I think what we're contributing a lot of that to is we actually, as a lot of you know, we redistrict our Spring Lake area. We enlarged it some. We made our Santa Fe South Side area a little bit smaller and redistributed the calls for service so that the manpower was more equal to the amount of calls that they received. And as a result, I think probably that increase of about 3.5% is due to our redistricting to some effect. You can see that in our results for our investigations clearance rates, I've listed 2 different percentages. We have our national UCR, which is our uniform crime rate, and then our Oklahoma City UCR that we report to the national uniform crime rate, which is the FBI. And that's a standard across the United States. The same crimes, it's apples to apples. The same crimes are reported, and your clearance rates on those crimes: homicides, rapes, major burglaries, auto theft, those types of things are all reported. That comparison, we're at 51% in 2010 and 09. We don't have the 2010 UCR report yet, but in 09 it was 48%, so we were about 3% higher than the national average. For property crimes, for the UCR, we're actually below that. It was 16.5%, and that's primarily burglaries, auto thefts, arson. We do report the arson in our statistics. We actually had a lower clearance rate. Now, in our LFR, which we've listed separately, we actually include a number of different crimes that we don't report in UCR because we still want to measure those, even though we don't report them. And some of those are like simple assault, forgery, fraud, embezzlement, and certain sex offenses that aren't reported in UCR at the national level. So we track more of those crimes than we report. You can see that our physical year to date, it's not the whole year, but the physical year to date, we're at 65% clearance rate. for person crimes, and we're at 26% clearance rate for property crimes. Our target is, and that's about average, that's about what we did last year. Our target is set at 67 and 25 respectively for fiscal year 2012. You can change that, Jason. Yes, sir.
How much of the percent of priority one calls responded to within 9 minutes and 30 seconds, the deficiency that you, from target there, do you attribute to the outlying areas?
I think if we eliminated those outlying areas, it would raise that percentage, but I can't tell you exactly how much. It's not going to be a huge amount, but it would raise that percentage, because when we did do the staffing study, we actually did the study eliminating about 100 square miles of meeting that, 90% goal, 9 minutes and 30 seconds in those outlying areas, and it actually lowered the number of additional officers that we would need to reach that standard within mainly the inner city without the outlying areas. So it does affect that. I just can't tell you exactly how much.
Well, everyone, or most everyone, expects when they call for an officer, they're going to be there within 93 seconds rather than 9 minutes and 30 seconds. But to the extent I have complaints, they're much greater from those people that say live east of Sooner Road than they are that live west of Sooner Road. As you get west of Sooner Road, you get into more densely populated area, and I'm sure you got more manpower there.
That's correct. Our staffing is based primarily on density and calls for service. Right. So we're going to have more officers in an inner city area where we have more calls for service.
Right. As well you should.
So our response time in some cases may be quicker than it would be in an outlying area. The only advantage to an outlying area is that with our officers staying within the speed limit, I hope, it's easier to get from point A to point B because there's not as much congestion and traffic lights and those types of things. But really having a small area like that in many cases is much easier to police. A more dense area, that type of area is much easier to police than the outlying areas, and we have a lot of that. So you're correct. It does take more time in many cases to get there.
Thanks.
Chief, have you ever done any analysis as to the consequences of not making that 9 minutes and 30 seconds?
No, we have not. Our second issue is the city faces a continued trend of graffiti violence. We've actually added that this last year, and we've added it to improve the tracking and investigation of graffiti vandalism through increased use of technology and coordination with other city departments, agencies, neighborhoods, and community leaders. One of those partnerships is with the county and with their SHINE program, where they use volunteers, and we supply them with some of the paints, and we provide them with cameras to actually take photographs and document some of the graffiti so that we could prosecute. So we're working, coordinating with the county in that effort, and they've been a big help to us. It's also for more aggressively addressing graffiti vandalism by reallocating resources to graffiti investigations. We have actually added personnel. Up till about a year and a half ago, we didn't have anybody investigating graffiti at all. Went to larceny, and they investigated vandalisms, and we have specifically moved that into our special operations to address that on a consistent basis. So a lot of it had to do with Councilman Sayer's issues within the Capitol Hill area and some things we needed to focus on. So, and we think it's worked very well. So we'll see some of the results.
Chief, in that regard, your feeling about that program that was coordinated with the county, is that it's been a good one and a productive one?
Yes, I think we've worked through some issues and glitches as far as them getting the supplies that they need.
It was eliminated by the legislature yesterday. So
it was what?
It was eliminated by the legislature yesterday.
That's good timing on my part, then.
So, well, no, it's not, because I think the reason it was eliminated because the county doesn't have the legal authority to spend the money for that, or that was the decision of the Attorney General, and then now the legislature didn't give them that authority. So it may be an opportunity for us to try to figure out a way to make that program work, because in my area, I don't know about the arrest of people that are doing it, but in terms of the way they've been able to make the area look, the graffiti removal has been extremely effective, and it makes people feel better about it. And I think it makes there is a theory that says if you remove it, you're deterring it, because they want to go someplace where they don't have to they want to tag it and make sure it stays tagged. So there may be in the next weeks, we'll probably want to look, in my opinion, at trying to find a way to bring that program funded internally some way, so that we don't miss the use of those people that are coming out of the DA's office or coming out of the court system based on the DA's insistence on community service as a way to handle some of that. There's that large block of people out there that have been doing it, and if we don't bring a system together that utilizes that, we'll miss that. So that's perfect timing as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
Along that same line, it's my understanding, and Jim, you may know more about this than I do, that the legal problem resulted from using a county employee to do the supervision over the labor that was being supplied by the offenders or by the volunteers. And I would like, on what Pete said, to consider, is there some way that we could take that over and supply that supervision, because it's been a very beneficial program in Ward 3, cleaning up some areas and also attacking the graffiti. And there's a tremendous synergy, I think, or leverage that comes when you've got one supervisor and several, dozens, if you will, people out there doing the actual work. It's really had a positive impact on some areas.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was not so much it was the funds that were being used to pay those employees. So, but you're right. That's.
Well, in one, we do have graffiti programs both within Public Works and within the police department. And we had put a supervisor over our graffiti program, and we're doing a much better job with our cleanups. And obviously, that could grow. I mean, we do have programs that are closely supervised. If at any point anybody wants to go out and assist us, other agencies that have the funding, additional funding to assist us in cleaning up, you can't have enough people out there cleaning up graffiti and making the city look better.
But we'll take a look and see what it would cost to bring back a supervisor to take over that aspect of it. What you're talking about is continue what the commissioner was doing and have a city supervisor get the DA's.
Get the same agreement with the public defender in the DA's office that he had. The guys that are actually supervising it are very effective supervisors. I've met them, and they're not as involved in the vandalism aspect as they are the removal of it. But I think there's been a relationship worked out. If I'm not, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's been a relationship worked out with OCPD where they take pictures and they do some things that are very helpful to you guys.
We actually purchased the cameras and provided them with the cameras to document the graffiti so that we could file charges.
I just think that we can find a way to salvage that program. They do more than just graffiti removal, by the way. I mean, they've taken over the maintenance at a lot of the public schools in I-89 that the I-89 just doesn't have the ability to do that. So we could, there are a lot of things. But if you're going to look into it, I'll shut up.
I think there's still a chance that bill may get passed. There's a chance it could come back up again, I understand. There's been some controversy over
I think yesterday was the end.
Huh?
I think yesterday was the end of it. They brought it back, and and I think there's a final death knell for it, and I think that was yesterday. Could be wrong, but I think that.
Bill, one question, and you may not know exactly the answer, but I'm curious on your graffiti discoveries. Could you give me a guess on how much of it is just kid or vandalism and how much of it is gang markings?
The smaller majority is going to be gang markings. I don't know the exact percentage, but the majority of our graffiti is going to be what they call taggers. And they consider themselves artists, and they compete with each other. They post a lot of their information. They may compete with a group in Tulsa. on tagging, so they want to show their artwork. And the majority of the graffiti that you see is not gang related. Now there is a lot in those specific areas where we have a lot of gang issues, but they're much smaller areas where tagging really you'll see citywide across the city. But it does give the same perception because people don't usually know the difference, so they figure where there's graffiti, there's crime. And so that's the huge benefit of cleaning that up. It really makes the neighborhood feel safer, the perception of feeling safer, if nothing else. And if you want to look at the statistics quickly, you can see the significance of the program. In 2012, we plan to increase the percentage of graffiti cases for prosecution by 100%. Our target's 750. Our actuals, when our program was just kind of getting started, when we only had one person over there, was 78. And that was high because the year before that, it was probably in the teens. So our actual right now is 375, and we want to increase that to about 750. You can see that 242 charges were filed on 44 suspects this year. And those suspects were responsible for about $93,000 worth of damage. We now have a program also that we're asking for restitution from those individuals, and we ask for restitution through the courts to the tune of about $82,000 and back to the city. We haven't received all that money, but we're asking for it, and the courts are being pretty good about putting that on to their sentence as far as a restitution back to the city. So you can see the numbers look pretty good. And the cases submitted for prosecution look good. So it's really, I think it's, and I hope we're seeing a lot less. I know in the Capitol Hill area, we've seen a lot less graffiti, and the businesses are really, really pleased with what's happened over there. Police Department issue, this issue we've had since the beginning of our Leading for Results, related to minority population growth and changing demographics. It increases the demand for police officers with bilingual skills and need for police department. To reflect the diversity of the community, there's a strong sense that we need to continue to do that. It's a huge challenge, but it's one that we think is important enough to make it part of one of our issues. We want to continue our recruiting campaign, although within the last 2 years we haven't had a recruiting class, so the numbers are not going to reflect. You can change over the next slide. The numbers are not going to reflect our 30% target. 30% of our applications received from minority will be as a result of recruiting efforts. To date, we're at about 22.3%. We have started recruiting because we plan to have a recruit class in August or September of about 45. We'll have that many vacancies. If you approve adding back the 22 positions, then we will obviously have to have another recruit school at some point this year to continue filling those positions. Next slide shows our sworn police demographics. You can see that majority obviously is Caucasian, about 85%, African American at 7.2%, and Hispanic at 4.8%. Those percentages are about half what you'll see the demographics of Oklahoma City. African Americans a little over 15%, Hispanic over 10%. But you also have to keep in mind that these numbers are not that bad because the statistics or demographics for citywide say African American 15%. 15% of this population is not eligible to be police officers. They're either over the age limit, or they're under the age limit, or there's a variety of things because you have to be over 21. So that includes all African Americans. So the percentage would actually be a lot less, and our numbers probably are closer to reflecting what the eligible pool of minorities would be within this community. But we want to do better. Police Department issue, there's increased demand for advanced technology in law enforcement. That's going to be an ongoing issue. Continue to improve the intelligence-led policing and forensic computer investigation capabilities. When I came on as chief, one of my goals was to migrate towards an intelligence-led policing philosophy, which we use technology data to identify some of their problems and areas to try to address them before the crimes occurred. It's been growing. It's an ongoing process, and we've been making accomplishments every year since then. The police department will still successfully adapt to the challenges posed by the growing availability of advanced technology. By 2015, we'll increase our computer forensic examinations to 208. You can see our target for next year is 160. Our actual to this date is 88, and for last year we had 154. The only way to increase that number is to add people to that unit. Otherwise we're not going to be, they can only do so much. And we have added some people periodically, and we're going to add another person this year to that unit because the demand is increasing at all times. All crimes involve some type of technology to that investigation. I don't care whether it's a burglar or it's drugs. There's some type of technology that's being used, whether it's the cell phones, computers, all types of data is being used, and their job is becoming more difficult. One thing I want to point out, about a little over a year and a half ago, we implemented taking DNA samples on property crimes. We're the only law enforcement agency I know in the country that has all their officers trained to take DNA samples out in the field and swab them. Other cities will maybe have a little unit that will go out and take them on an ad-need basis, but all of our officers are capable of taking DNA in the field. We trained every one of them to take swabs on property crimes, burglaries. And I'll just give you a comparison. In fiscal year 10, we got 198 property crime DNA samples taken. To date, in this year, we've taken 245, so we're already ahead of the total number for last year. Last year, we had 54 hits. Those are CODIS hits that go into the system where DNA is put in by other states nationally and also by the state of Oklahoma if somebody's incarcerated. But we had 54 of those hits last year. To date, we already have 105 hits on property crimes. We've had 93 state hits and 12 federal hits. So for us, it's been a huge success. We think it's been a huge benefit in trying to apprehend in our property crime. Most of those are burglaries. Now we're going to go into our proposed budget changes for your consideration. It's going to show a restoration of 16 officers' positions at a cost of a little over $1 million. We want to restore 6 lieutenants. Lieutenants are our first-line supervisors, by the way. That's our sergeants are not. In some cities they are if you're in the military, but our lieutenants are our first-line supervisors at about $500,000. And we actually want to add 1 civilian position, and we'll quickly go through what those positions will be so you can get an idea of where they're going to be. In our administration bureau, we're going to add. Administration bureau can be deceiving. A lot of people think administration bureau is just administrators. Well, it's not. We have functions within the administration bureau that are actually sworn enforcement positions. So it's that's a little bit deceiving. It's not just a chief and a couple majors and those types. We're not adding those types of people. These are actually people that are out there doing the job on the front lines. Within the administration bureau, we're adding 1 interdiction lieutenant. This position was cut last year from that exact position. We're going to put it back into the interdiction unit because we also want to add 2 drug interdiction officers that we also cut last year. Now those were cut, but they were saved and kept there through the recovery grant. So those 2 drug interdiction officers now will have to be funded out of the general fund. So we're going to add the 1 interdiction unit, and then actually, however you want to call it, we're going to retain those 2 drug interdiction officers that were paid out of the recovery grant last year. There were 7 positions out of that grant, recovery grant, that were saved last year out of the 22. So we actually ended up physically cutting last year 15 positions. We're going to add 1 information technology officer. This officer is actually going to perform IT responsibilities with the police department. It's going to increase our officer staff from 4 to 5. We have increasing demands on our workflow in that area, and feel like we need that. Also in the administration bureau, we're going to we're going to add the one gang enforcement unit lieutenant. Now, we had a gang enforcement lieutenant over our gangs unit that was created, I think, in around 2005, because we actually doubled our number of our gang officers and made 2 actual shifts in the gangs. So we overfilled a sergeant's position to create a lieutenant because we needed a supervisor for that, and it's been overfilled that whole time. And what we want to do with one of the positions is make that a permanent lieutenant position for the gang unit, because that gang unit is not going to be eliminated. It's here for the duration, and we want that position to be permanent. So this will replace that overfilled position in the gang unit. We'll also have one special investigations unit officer. This person was cut last year from that exact position. They'll do major narcotics investigation crimes. We cut them that position from that area last year. We're going to put it back because the need is there. And then we're going to have one office of professional standards. Professional standards is what normally you would think of as our internal affairs. Our caseload isn't necessarily getting larger, but it is getting more complicated. Again, a lot of it has to do with the technology and those types of things that are used in those investigations. They're taking longer. Time is of the essence when we're investigating any misconduct within the police department, and we want to add a position. I'm actually going to attempt to add at some point one more investigating position that's needed in that unit. This will increase my staff of investigators to 6. I have 5 in there right now. I'll increase it to 6. Okay. Also in the Administration Bureau, we have one fleet management officer. That position will stay where it is. It was paid for last year out of the recovery grant. We have one sergeant that oversees our fleet management vehicles, installations, to make sure that all that's being taken care of. We're also going to one CALEA officer, which was also saved last year by the grant, by the recovery grant. So that position will remain in our CALEA program, which is our Commission on Accreditation on Law Enforcement. We actually eliminated one position last year completely, but we think we can continue that program with the 2 positions that we have in that unit, along with one lieutenant to oversee it. And then our drug court officer, which was also funded last year through the recovery grant. We work with the district courts. We've been in that program from its inception. We were a part of building that program, a hugely beneficial program for addressing drug addictions. And those people that really don't need to go into the criminal justice system or to the correctional system, they've had a lot of success, and we feel like our part in that is instrumental. This year we also want to add one latent fingerprint. This is the one civilian position that I had listed. Last year we have 3 individuals that are technicians, fingerprint technicians. 2 of those individuals retired on the same day. Put us in a tremendous bind because we didn't have any redundancy built in that somebody could step in that was qualified. It takes over a year to qualify a person if they're not already qualified. So we actually hired 2 internal individuals to promote people from inside, but that training takes for over a year, so we had to hire a part-time person that was retired and that is accredited because our backload became tremendous this year, and we feel like it's to our benefit to have an additional fingerprint examiner because of the caseload and because of those redundancy issues in the future, that we'll be able to deal with that. So for continuity of operation, we feel like this position is really important for us to have 4 people in that unit. We're also going to add one intelligence officer out of those 22 that are coming back in. That intelligence-led policing, we have an intelligence officer that is assigned to every one of our divisions, and they're responsible for analyzing data and working with our analysts within our special investigations unit to determine where the crimes are being committed within the divisions, where we need to put our resources, where we need to concentrate our efforts on a month-to-month basis. We think we're getting tremendous benefits from that. The idea is we want our officers in the field to have direct access to that intelligence. We want to be able to put it in their lap and show them what's happening in their sector and what they need to address, who the suspects are, where the crimes are being committed. We think that's a very proactive way. Intelligence-led policing is really a movement throughout the nation. Oklahoma City really started it and developed it probably before most of the agencies did. They're now trying to play catch-up. In fact, we just had L.A. County come in and look at our process, and they were extremely impressed. If you're talking about L.A. County, he's usually very progressive. They were very impressed with the program and wanted to adopt a lot of the things that we're doing. So the position we don't have one in is investigations. And investigations needs that to kind of connect the dots from different units to unit. You may have one person committing a crime over here, a burglary, but also committed a rape over here. Those are the types of things that officer will be working on, and so we want to add that position to investigations. And then the other area we want to add officers into is our burglary unit. We want to add 3 into burglary. As you can see in our clearance rate nationally, it's lower than it should be. We would like to do a much bigger job. Per capita, Oklahoma City has always been higher in burglaries than most other major cities. Can't give you all the reasons for that, but we always have been. But burglary has always been the unit we've pulled people from because person crimes have been a higher priority, sex offenders, those types of things that we've had to take on enforcement on, mandated enforcement through new legislation. Most of those people have been pulled from burglary because we had some people in there and it was a list of lower priority. I want to put those people back in there and try to make that a larger priority in addressing burglaries within this community.
Chief, you said we've always been high in burglaries. Have we seen an increase during this economic challenge?
Burglaries, I've kind of kept track, and I kind of keep track since I was chief in 2003. The burglaries themselves have really been on an increase for quite a long time. Property crimes overall have not. Some of those have dropped, but a lot of it had to do with gas drive-offs, and those plummeted significantly. But burglaries themselves, if you look at burglaries, and I kind of pulled, just so you can kind of get a visual. In 2003, when I started as chief, we had burglaries. We have to date, in 2010, we have 1,600 more burglaries than we had in 2003. Per year, 1,600 per year more burglaries than we had in over the last 8 years. So that's kind of been on a constant incline. Assaults have been the same. Assaults have also been. All crime has been on a slight increase. We had a huge plummet back in the early 2002, 2003, 4, 5. Assaults had gone up significantly in 2005, and we started to reduce those because of drive-by shootings. We had so many of them. But the assaults have slowly gone up since 2003. And so overall, all crime has gone up slowly. It's not a spike like we've seen in sometimes, but it is slowly increasing. In the Operations Bureau, we're going to add 1 Will Rogers lieutenant and 1 Hefner lieutenant. These are from 2 lieutenants. Actually, those lieutenants, for example, may have come from the jail. We cut 2 positions from the jail last year. Instead of putting those positions back in the jail, we actually have 2 divisions that have 19 lieutenants, which is what their fully staffed number should be. We have 2 with 18, and we want to fully staff all of our divisions with lieutenants. So those lieutenants will go into those divisions, so all the divisions will be fully staffed. We also have one Spring Lake lieutenant was there this year because we actually paid for that out of the recovery grant funds, and we will be paying for that now also out of the 22 positions if you approve those to come back into the police department. We also have 1 emergency services lieutenant. This is a lieutenant that will be going into a different position because we wanted to create for several years a lieutenant to oversee our bomb squad unit on a full-time basis. Our bomb units and our technicians and our investigations, we're getting quite a few more call-outs. The equipment's, we've gotten more equipments over the years from Homeland Security that needs to be maintained adequately, those types of things, and we want a lieutenant to fully oversee that program on a full-time basis. So that's what that position would actually be. In the overtime programs that Craig Freeman had spoken earlier of, our specialized traffic enforcement unit was paid out of our recovery money, out of JAG money, out of grant money. Last year, we had a shorter program prior to that, was paid for through pass-through money through the state for traffic enforcement, but it's called STEP, Specialized Traffic Enforcement Overtime. That program alone last year wrote about over 18,000 citations, and the primary enforcement for those citations is speeding and seat belts, two primary areas where people lose their lives, either through speeding or not wearing their seat belt. So those are the primary focus. They write them for other citations too. They also work high accident areas, but they're focused on those types of violations during that program. We pay the officers overtime. They go out and they specifically enforce traffic laws. The gang enforcement overtime is also overtime that we've paid for in the past through grants. Those grants are slowly drying up. This is an absolute, have to have. I mean, it's at the top of the list if something needs to be funded, because especially during this time of year, we have an increase in some of the violent crime in some of those gang-infested areas, and that money is used to put more officers in those specific areas to address those issues, and we've done that for the last several years, and it's hugely beneficial. So,
Chief, excuse me, but does this represent any proposed increase in overtime, or just the fact that we're going to fund it ourselves, but the amount of overtime will be the same?
It'll be the same.
Okay.
About the amount of overtime will be the same, and it allows for us to put about 4 days a week, put about 8 officers or so on a shift out in areas that we're having specific problems with gang issues. And it's just a continuation of that. It's just that we're funding it versus a grant funding it.
Okay, thank you.
Just a couple of programs. Just want to kind of bring you up to date on our Family Awareness and Community Teamwork Program, our FACT and our Truancy. The COPS grant helped fund both of those, or at least helped add additional people to them. We had 2 people in truancy prior that the city funded. We had 2 people previously in FACT that the city funded. But with the grants, we added 2 people in FACT to give us a total of 4. We added 4 people with the truancy program to give us a total of 6 truancy officers. The Family Awareness and Community Teamwork, probably the most significant here recently is we've added the Hathaway Center. We've used the rec center that was closed last year as a result of budget cuts by the parks. We've 3916 South Lindsay. We actually went in, we developed partnerships with a number of individuals so that we could provide things like martial arts, tutoring, mentoring, character building, and counseling. We'll house our FACT program, our 2 officers, our additional 2 officers to work South Side kind of gangs. FACT program is primarily to address some of the gang issues and to work some of our South Side individuals that are involved in gangs or at risk to be in gangs. We're also going to use our we're going to also use it for some martial arts classes. All of our martial arts classes right now are, you can go ahead and change that slide, are in quite a few of the schools. We have a lot of kids that are in the schools, and they hold a final competition every year at the Cox Center. I think Councilman Sager attended, and she can attest to how many kids were there, and amazingly how well they were behaved in the program, and the teachers love it, and it's primarily character building. They don't learn to hit each other. They learn moves, positions, great for exercise, and they learn a lot of character building, and I think you can see that in how well they behaved there. Some of the partnerships that we have developed to make this happen, very little of it's being paid for by the city. We use some asset forfeiture, drug seizure funds to buy some equipment, computers and things. We'll continue to do so. But some of our partnerships is the Leadership Foundation of Oklahoma has agreed to pay for the monthly utility bills. And so that's paid for every month, and they've agreed to do that as a partnership. Home Depot donated $10,000 to help refurbish it, brought some volunteers out to build cabinets, did things. If you get a chance to go out and look at it, it's amazing. It's amazing what they've done. Glidden Paint UCO Graphic Arts, Oklahoma Arts Council, Globe Life Insurance, Frontline Church, Skyline Church, Sam's Club. There's just so many, and those are just a few of the partnerships that we've developed in making all this happen. And as a result of that, a lot of them want to continue that relationship to make sure it keeps going. There's also a lot of social services and things like that that we are working with that want to provide services through the facility as we feel may be fit. You can see here, these are, this is some of the age group that they have. The kids will be out, and they'll provide a class there once a week. They really didn't have a facility or an adequate facility to be able to provide that class to kids once a week. During school year, they're in all the classes within the almost all the elementary schools within the Oklahoma City Public School System, providing that class to their elementary kids. So, go ahead, next slide. The Hathaway Center, you can see in the background, that's the library that they built. All the books were donated. They built, Home Depot built the cabinets. The individual there on the left that the officer is meeting with is one of our FACT kids. He's 17 years old, came from a single-parent home, and he quit school in the 7th grade. He's 17 now, but he quit school in the 7th grade. He actually came to them. He'd heard about the program and walked in off the street. The funny thing is that shortly after that, his mother came and said, how could he get her son into the program? She'd heard about it. Well, she didn't know he was already there, that he had actually come in about a week ago and was interested in it and had already come and asked about it. But he entered the program in October of 2010. He regularly attends our FACT mentoring classes. He's currently attending Metro Tech. He's actually responsible for the school's daily announcements now, and described as Metro Tech faculty as a model student. So those are just some of the things that we're doing, that some of these kids have been involved in gangs or for other reasons weren't going to school and have sought out some of that help. And it's, I used to think we tried to hit as many of those kids as we could in a short period of time, and I'm of the fact now that quality is better than quantity, and if we get one at a time, we actually have 78 kids right now we're working with through the FACT program. We think that'll grow after moving to the south side. And those kids get other kids involved and tell other kids and help promote them to stay out of gangs. So we feel like it's a beneficial program. The Truancy program is another program that was funded through the COPS grants. We think so far the results have been significant. In spring of 2010. We had 2 truancy officers, and we increased that to 6 through our COPS grants. And you can see here in spring of 2010, we actually did a pilot program in fall of 2009 with just 2 officers that we had some success with. But then we added the officers in spring of 2010. You can see out of the 6,413 truants that they had in the spring, we made 2,169 contacts, and those contacts either going to the home, making phone calls, talking to the parents, advising them of that their kids are out of school, what's the issues. It's a non-threatening, it's more of a voluntary compliance meeting in the beginning. It can result into them being issued a ticket, either a ticket, city violation now that we have, or through the state if it becomes significant enough. But the idea with the program was to keep those kids from getting to that point of 10-plus absences and their parents ending up in the state judicial system as a result of them. Because that's too late. The kids have missed so much class, those 10 absences within a semester, they can't make that back up. So the idea was try to get those kids before that happened, because before they wouldn't get hit until after they've already missed 10 times and it was too late. So you can see the contacts that we made, and then in fall of 2010, the actual truant numbers went down to 3,500, and our contacts went up to 2,479. The truancy reduction, you can actually see in the spring of 2010, you see the percentage of absences from the individuals went down by 47%. So significant decrease in the number of absences for those individuals that were actually truant. In fall of 2010, it fell by 36%. So, and an indicator like I spoke of before, where they had 10-plus absences, 10-plus truants. Well, in 2007, before we had the program, the truant program, the truants, there were 584 cases taken to the DA's office in 2007. Now, that's not all the kids because they didn't have enough manpower to get to all of them, so that's 584. In 2010, with our program, they've only had to take 202. So that's reduced it from that 584 to 202 by getting it early, getting with the parents, finding out what the problem is, and getting them in school. Most of them have been complying, and parents would, I guess when police get involved, it gets their attention in many cases, and it's, we think it's been very successful. We now have our offices and house the truancy program over at the school headquarters building on Klein, and the partnership with the schools and have been fantastic, and Carl Springer has been very, very receptive to the idea of us working together to try to reduce the truancy rate and the dropout rate in Oklahoma City. I've always contended that if we can keep them in school, that's the way we lower crime, and that's been proven. So we want to do our part, and we think it's an important part for the police department to be involved in.
Chief?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to backtrack just a little bit on the specialized traffic enforcement overtime.
Mm-hmm.
Is this based on a year activity of the numbers that you gave in reference to the number of citations that was issued?
Right. Those are citations written just from that program, just from the overtime hours in that program, the 18,000.
So, in your opinion, then, the program is successful and is something that you all want to continue?
Right. I'm a believer at some point in time, if we were able to ever increase our staff, we need to reinitiate our traffic unit that really does specifically enforce traffic violations and investigate serious accidents. Now, we have a traffic unit that investigates serious accidents, but I think this is just an indicator of how important it is that we need more traffic enforcement. I think if you look at the surveys that have been done over the past several years, at the top of those surveys, people are saying one of the things they're least happy about is traffic enforcement. They want more traffic enforcement. And I think that we haven't. I mean, our traffic over the years, the enforcement has kind of slipped. We used to have, years and years ago, we used to have a traffic unit, and that was their responsibility. Well, that was done away with and incorporated all that traffic enforcement responsibility into operations. Will be between the time of having to respond to calls and somewhat patrol officers being apathetic about wanting to enforce traffic laws anyway, those numbers had dropped, and over the last couple of years with the STEP program and with some other initiatives that we've taken, we've actually been able to do more traffic enforcement, say in areas like school zones that we hadn't enforced in quite some time.
How many citations do you issue a year? What percentage did the 18,000 represent?
I think, remember, do you know the number right off the top of your head? I may have written that down.
That's okay.
I'm not sure. I'll have to get that for you, what the total number is.
Questions for the police chief? Chief, thank you very much. I agree the truancy program, I think, is very, very important, and I think it's going to help us on a couple of fronts, in crime reduction and also dropout rates, and both of them we could use some improvement, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Move on to fire?
Yes, yes, indeed. Chief Bryant?
Good morning. It's good to be here again to present our proposed fiscal year 2011-2012 budget. We're on page 175 of the budget book. I won't make a comment about my photo other than to say I'm just glad it's still there another year. So that's a good thing. But while we're getting set up, and I would like to recognize my staff that's with me here today, our command staff, Deputy Chief Mark Woodard, our Operations Division Chief, Deputy Chief Cecil Clay, our Support Services Deputy Chief, and our Fire Marshal, Kelly Sawyers, as well as our Business Manager, Lance Musgrave, and operating our program today, our Management Specialist, Clint Regier. It's also good to see our President of our Firefighters Local, Phil Syke, with us here today, so appreciate Phil being here. Go ahead. The Fire Department's mission is to provide emergency responses, fire prevention, and public education services to the Oklahoma City community so they can have their lives and property protected. Our fire department issues, I'll cover them in bullet form this morning and maybe elaborate on a few of them. Fire fatalities, obviously, is the top of our list, that we try and keep that down, and I'll address that in a strategic result here in a minute. But obviously increased service demand, and we continue to see that, and we'll again have more on that here in a minute. Regionalization, not too much going on there right now, although we do, there's a discussion or two along the way about that, and from the aspect of maybe consolidation of services and looking at it more in a regional sense instead of a city to city. Obviously, emergency medical services, and use this opportunity just to remind you that on July 12th, we will be conducting a council workshop that coincides with this year's window of opportunity on EMS transport. Homeland Security is obviously something we have to keep paying attention to. I think we've done a remarkable job over the past several years in bringing the necessary assets to protect this community from those types of events that are covered under Homeland Security, but obviously we have a concern with the federal budget, such as it is, and the discussions going on there, that we would see a decrease in that funding. And again, while I think we've done a good job of getting those assets in the city, our issue would probably be sustainment of those assets, and so that's why we have to keep that as an issue that we're paying attention to. Our aging facilities, currently our 35 fire stations and a few other buildings that we operate out of, the average age of our facilities right now is 32 years. We've done some remodeling to some of those, obviously. And, currently our annual maintenance cost, just facilities maintenance, is about a little over $350,000 a year. So, again, that's an issue that, again, some of those facilities are getting to the point where the money we put into them is probably not really extending the life of them so much as just, taking care of immediate needs. Our strategic results. By 2012, the structure fire fatality rate in Oklahoma City will be at or below the national average, which, based on the most current data from the U.S. Fire Administration, is 1.14 per 100,000 residents. Currently, to this point in this fiscal year, we've had 4 fatalities, so that gives us a rate of 0.73. So we're under that, and we're happy about that. I think really nationally and here in the city, that's trending downward. Obviously, some good things are going on there fire prevention-wise. By 2012, the citizens of Oklahoma City, even anticipating growth in outlying areas, will still receive emergency responses within 6 minutes, 70% of the time, in order to protect lives and limit the damage to property and the environment. Our current fiscal year estimate is 73%, and I want to point out, because I don't want to confuse it later on with some other information that we'll be covering, that this strategic result takes in total response time, which would include dispatch time, the turnout time, and then actually the travel time from the station to the incident scene.
Chief, does this include both medical and fire emergency?
This is everything, yes, sir. Total. The next result is that by 2012, the community of Oklahoma City will benefit from each Oklahoma City fire station, making at least 30 non-emergency public safety contacts per month. And our current estimate for this year is 78. So this is something that we continue to do very well at, and more than likely might have to adjust that target upward because we just keep overperforming in this area. But just to let you know that this is takes in a lot of activities of our firefighters, and this includes making neighborhood association meetings. This includes being at schools and involved in reading and mentoring programs and lots of other special events. Again, we highly encourage our firefighters to be as involved as they can in the community surrounding that facility. So they're doing very well in this area. And next, by 2012, every citizen in Oklahoma City, regardless of location, will benefit from a fully equipped, fully staffed, advanced life support emergency response vehicle arriving within 6 minutes 70% of the time to assess and treat their medical emergencies. This results specific to our advanced life program in our EMS, Emergency Medical Services. Current estimate for this year is 63.8%. To update you, currently 27 of our 35 engine companies in the city are at the ALS level, that they have those advanced level of training as far as paramedics and the equipment that they use. But as I said earlier in one of our issues, the demand for these services is continuing to increase. And I think that is reflective in that estimate there. Just to go over our organizational chart, currently we're budgeted for 951 uniform positions, 28 civilian positions for a total of 979, and you can see the breakdown of the fire department divisions there and the number of people in those divisions and work sections. Our proposed budget by purpose or line of business, you see that break it down by administration and then 36 positions under that. Operational services, obviously, the bulk of our employees and the work that we do. Fire prevention services and support services, again, those make up the major divisions of the department. The capital expense I can tell you is primarily in vehicle replacement, and that number reflects what's been encumbered. And obviously, you're aware that that's been funded over the last several years by the city and schools use tax. And just to kind of give you an update that in the upcoming year, we'll go out to replace 3 engine companies, 2 ladder companies, 4 brush pumpers, and 3 water tankers, supply tankers. And that gives you the total budget of $119.8 million. The administrative line of business, you can see that's broken down into executive leadership and business services, and there's, again, 36 positions, about 37 positions in that line of business. One of the performance measures that 99% of full-time employees without an on-the-job injury in the current year is part of our safety program. In the fire prevention line of business, you can see that that's broken down by the work sections in that division, which would be investigations, inspection and code enforcement, and public education. We're currently closing out a $35,000 smoke alarm grant, and to date we have distributed almost 1,700 of the 4,100 alarms that were purchased as part of our Project Life initiative. A couple of the key measures in that line of business that, based on second quarter information, our public safety education work section is on pace to serve about 86,000 citizens. The target is 100,000 annually. In our investigation work section, 52% of the cases that they've investigated have been referred to the district attorney's office for prosecution, and again, they continue to overperform the target of 37%, which is kind of based on a national average. In the support services line of business, is basically broken down into fire dispatch and fire maintenance, and fire maintenance covers both vehicle and facilities maintenance. 32 positions, the total budget for that division, $7.7 million. A couple of the key measures that 96% of the incidents dispatched are within 1 minute, so from the time they receive the call from 911, that they've taken the information down, have alerted the personnel at the stations and completed that dispatch. And again, they continue to do very well in this area, the target being 90%. As far as our vehicle maintenance work section, they're on pace to complete about 1,400 fleet repair jobs for the fiscal year, and their target is 1,500. Under the operational services line of business, and once again, this is the majority of our personnel working at the stations, you can see how they're broken up, that the majority of their time and the work that they do is involved in emergency medical services. And you can see how that's reflected in the budget for that line of business. The other part being suppression or firefighting, and then the time that they spend in training to maintain skills. Did again want to go over again that we were awarded a federal SAFER grant, which restored the 29 positions that we cut in this current fiscal year. We were very happy to get that. We've started those employees. They started April 29th. And so, again, they'll be funded, those positions, for a 2-year period. A couple of the key measures, 53% of fire responses are within 5 minutes from dispatch to arrival. Again, this is subtracting out the dispatch part of response time. Again, we're at 53%, the target's 70. And I'll just go down to the bottom when there's 63% of emergency medical responses are within 5 minutes. That target is 70 also. So you can see there that we've dipped a little bit below our target. I can tell you very confidently that Chief Woodard's addressed that with his staff, and it means that we're doing everything that we believe we can possibly do. Our firefighters are doing their best to get in their gear and get out of the station as quickly and safely as possible. That we're, again, doing the best that we can, everything that we're able to control to make sure we meet that target. However, as I said earlier, on the demand side, we've seen an increase in demand for responses of 25% over the last 5 years. That's jumped from 68,000 to what we currently project for this year being 85,000. Demand is also, we know, is increasing in the outlying areas of the city where our stations aren't as closely located together as they are in the core of the city, obviously. We believe that contributes to this too. And really going back a few years to 2007, I believe that kind of is the justification for why we went to the voters for 3 additional fire stations to locate in those outlying areas to make sure that we try and maintain as small response times as possible. And so, again, we've relocated an existing station to the far northeast quadrant over the past year. Of course, the plans are that 3 additional stations from the 2007 bond issue we'll be working on those in the next few years. Some of the key statistics, again, we anticipate almost 3,000 fire responses in this fiscal year, over 63,000 EMS responses. The other part of that 85,000 that you see in the lower corner there, the total responses make up the remainder of those, which run the gamut of good intent or service calls, including false alarms. So to kind of sum up here this morning, major budget changes, again, the restoration of the 29 firefighter positions through the federal SAFER grant, and you can see the budget for that. Add a couple of clerical positions, as Craig mentioned in his presentation. And I guess the good news is none of these budget changes or program improvements required us to increase our budget in any way. We did the clerical positions from existing money that we had in our budget, just reallocating some of that. And again, obviously, it was a pretty good shot in the arm to get the federal grant and get us back flush as far as staffing is concerned. And with that, I do want to thank you very much for your time this morning. And again, having done this now for a little over 6 years and being on the department for 29, certainly seen some challenging times in the past. don't know, how the past couple of years has fit and all that, but I really do sincerely appreciate all the opportunity to work with you and all that. Appreciate your guidance and your direction and the working environment, because I know that's not the case in a lot of the places from some of the other chiefs that I talked to. So I certainly appreciate that. And with that, if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them for you this morning.
All right, questions for the fire chief?
Your Honor?
Yeah, Pat?
On the 3 fire stations that were provided for in the 07 bond issue,
Yes, sir.
I'm assuming that would require additional staff.
Correct.
Have you got a long-term budget implications of that?
Well, I can tell you the first station that would be the first additional station, we've already taken that into consideration with the extra engine company that we have at Station 1 right now. So when we open that facility, we'll take that piece of equipment and that crew and move that. So that one won't require any additional personnel. The next 2 will, and that's just something that we've been working with the budget office on and the manager's office, and they're aware. I think, that,
Have you got plans to implement a recruit school in the near future?
Well, again, we currently have one going on because we restored those positions. And again, it's just based on the number of retirements. I can tell you that the date we started this current recruit class, although we tried to fill all the vacant positions we had at that particular point in time, we've already had about 4 or 5 of our personnel come in and sign up to retire. So that will depend on the number of retirements that we see, and as we get closer to opening those additional stations, and remember, the first one we already have the staff for. The second one probably won't be for, a few more years because of the bond and selling the bonds. So, again, so we'll have to take into consideration. I would anticipate there being probably, in the time it takes to get to that point, and just to keep vacancies filled, we'll probably continue to have recruit classes along the way.
About how many people graduate from your average recruit class?
This current class is 43, and that's probably a little bit of a large class. Again, that's 29 of the positions that we cut, and then the remainder were vacant positions that we currently had. We generally run in the 25 to 30 range when we have a recruit class.
One other question, Chief. You mentioned that you're concerned about the aging of your facilities.
Yes, sir.
Fire station. In the 07 bond issue, was there any money provided in that bond issue to rehabilitate those stations?
Yes, sir. We put in, I think, about $2.5 million of unlisted money, and that was to address those issues. And we've done that in the previous bond issues as well. And Station 11 and Station 12 are currently going through some remodel work with those unlisted funds.
And by remodel, they're brought up to current day standards and that sort of thing?
As best we can, sir. I mean, that's limited, and we have to spread that out over all of our facilities. So we try and prioritize and put the...
You made a comment earlier, I think, that said to the effect that a lot of the money was being spent simply on keeping the stations functioning and not on extending their life. And
yes, sir.
Is that the current situation as well?
In some of our facilities, some of them are operating just fine. We're not seeing a lot of, ongoing and repetitive maintenance issues. However, there are some that we are experiencing that in. I'll also point out in the 2007 bond issue, we did provide funding to rebuild 2 of our existing stations, and those are 2 of the facilities that we're in that shape with now, that we just have put in money into for so long to kind of keep them up and running, that the best decision now is to rebuild them.
Thank you very much.
Chief, I want to thank you for your acknowledgement to the council as your ability to work with us, but I think it should just really be in the reverse, because I want to let you know that I am honored to work with you. I think you do an absolute exceptional job in reference to providing information to this council, and everything that I have asked for, you've been more than willing to do whatever you needed to do to provide the information to us. And I just think that, if and I'm not to downside any other department. But I think you do an absolute great job of managing the issues that your department has. And I know from last year's experience doing one of the maps, the contentious issues that you had to contend with, and the way you were still able to manage information to this council, I think was absolutely admirable. And so I just want you to know that, and I think that would be the words of most of us here on this council, if not all of us, is that how we feel like that we're blessed to have someone like you to work with.
I appreciate you saying so, but I have to give all the credit, of course, to my very bright and talented staff. I mean, they're the ones that, again, not only help me with the decision-making process and make things work, but they're a tremendously supportive group, too, and I appreciate that. Appreciate your comment.
Larry?
Chief, you've mentioned the additional stations that were in the 2007 bond issue and that they were coming online in the future. Could you give our viewers a little expectation of what that would involve by station?
The first one that we have additional station plan to build would be in at the location of 119th and South Rockwell. We have some funding currently to start doing some of the architectural and engineering work on that facility and the design work, so that should be completed here pretty quick. And I think as far as, and Craig and the manager, you might help me out with this, but next year we'll get the funding for that project and start the construction of it.
We'll see how the property taxes hold.
Exactly, yes, sir. That's the plan, I should say.
Ed?
Well, I find the 64% 6-minute response time troubling. I wonder if the public understands the difference in outcome with each minute that passes, especially someone in cardiac arrest with no perfusion of the brain. And that if we were talking of response times in the 8-10 minute range, then really we're much too late. And we'll get into it much more in the workshop in July, I believe, but in the inner core of the city, is it fair to say that fire is arriving faster than EMSA?
We still, citywide, not just necessarily in the core, but citywide, are on the scene of a medical emergency about 60% of the time first.
Okay, so these numbers would be even worse, if it weren't for fire getting there first.
Yeah, that's, again, especially in some of the outlying areas, obviously, I would agree with that.
Can you quantify, you said that the demand is increasing, can you quantify for us by station or by region where the demand is increasing?
We do track response times down to the individual unit, so we can get that type of information. So it would just depend on what area you're looking at, what station specifically, that we can provide those types of response times. So, and your point is correct that the figures here represent an average. So in the downtown or the core area of the city, our response times in a lot of cases are 2 minutes or less. Once you get into the outlying areas where the resources are more thinner out there, even though we've seen an increase in demand, that's where you see the response times jump beyond that 6-minute point. And so when they average out, that's what we come up with. And there has been discussion in the past, I should say, about looking at it more regionally within the city and doing, what they refer to as fractile response times, so we can kind of see, gives people a little bit even more detailed picture of what that response time is in that specific area of the city.
Well, I'd definitely be interested in that data if you could, if I could.
We'll start putting that together, and we'll probably have that ready at the workshop, if that's acceptable, or if you want to see it earlier, let me know.
Thank you.
Okay. Comments or questions? Yeah, Pat, and then
just one quick question, Chief. On the ALS, I think you've made some great improvement in the number of engines that are equipped for ALS. Do you have a strategy in mind to get to 100% sometime?
Well, the strategy is to recruit and hire and also train as many paramedics as we can. Now, I would say probably about 3 years ago, we were making pretty good progress. We were able to hire, and we were hiring regularly, so that increased our number of paramedics on the department, and we made a pretty good little jump there for a few years period. With the hiring freeze in place and things of that nature, obviously that slowed that down somewhat. But I know this current recruit class, I think, I know there's a few paramedics in it. I don't know the exact number, but so again, we recruit very strongly for paramedics. Again, we give them preference in our hiring process so that we can hire as many as possible. Any member of our department that's not currently a paramedic that steps up and says, I want to become one, we have funding in place to get them in school. So
is the lack of paramedics the major obstacle to making it?
Yes, sir. That's absolutely
the equipment is not an issue.
No, sir.
Equipment. Okay.
If equipment and funding is not an issue.
It's just that you can't hire the people. They're not.
Can't hire enough of them fast enough. Yes, sir.
Chief.
David?
Chief,
Then Gary.
since we're reviewing the budget, and not to go into too much detail, but would there be any increases in your budget if the two services did merge, the IMSA with the fire department?
Well, you'd have to take into consideration the model that you were putting in place. So again, depending on how we put that service delivery model together and what it consisted of, it could, and then maybe it'd stay pretty much at the same level of funding of what it costs for that service now, and there may be even opportunities to, to save some funding of what it currently costs now. And those are some of the things that we're looking at to present to you in the workshop in July.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Gary?
Well, just to follow up on a couple of things that have been mentioned, lack of paramedics is not just peculiar to the fire department. The transport systems are having trouble keeping their medic numbers up. The problem is that the requirements at the paramedic level keep increasing, and the number of people willing to either get into it or pass it at the very end is not increasing anymore. So the pool of people is not increasing for the demand going up. So it's not peculiar just to the fire department can't hire them, it's just the same all over. On the buildings, it seems strange for some of us that have been around forever, but most of the buildings they're working on now were new when I was a young firefighter, and even the buildings that were built with the '89 public safety sales tax are reaching 20 years old. So it's going to keep getting worse if you don't get on top of it all along. And then the question I have for you, Keith, is I haven't heard anything lately about the value of your traffic preemption systems. Are you still utilizing them at all? And if they aren't, and I'm referring back to your response time issues and the traffic is getting worse and everything else, if they're still providing a value, or are we still putting them in when we put in new traffic signals?
Well, we still, of course, have them in the two corridors in the Shields area and the Northwest Highway area that we've had them in. I think the whole issue of traffic management and traffic preemption, therefore, has been given over to traffic. They're doing it and looking at it kind of on a citywide basis, is my understanding. We certainly provide input when they seek it as far as our response. So I think that's kind of where that issue lies at this point, and that's the best I can speak to it right now. Again, this is somewhat anecdotal, I know, but I don't hear that coming from our field units on a regular basis that we're encountering bad traffic issues, except, again, where it's already been addressed in the Northwest Highway area and the Shields Boulevard area.
Okay.
I would like to, on the paramedic issue, I think the thing that we do have going for us is that the retention level for paramedics is not that long in the industry. but the ones that we do hire and train and have on our department, we're keeping them obviously a lot longer. So I think that's good for our system. Well, again, obviously the pay and benefits of this department are very attractive, and so we don't lose them to other agencies and other fields.
Yes, Ed?
One more question. Can you quantify in terms of development, residential development, the number of development that is not connected to a water line? And what does that do to cost of and logistics of fighting fire?
Well, again, there's a lot of the development in that area, and again, because of the development in that area, that's why the demand is increasing in those areas that aren't currently covered with the city's water system. The one thing that we've done to address that is the purchase and the placement of our large water supply tankers. So those are located in those areas, and in many cases, when we do get a structure fire in those areas, not only will we respond the closest one, we will also send the next closest one to try and put as much water on that scene as possible. In some cases, it does require us to basically shuttle that water from where we have a static water source, such as a hydrant, filling up a vehicle and taking it to the scene. And again, we have a kind of a shuttle system going on there to maintain water supply for that operation. But it's definitely been a challenge over the past several years. But that's the way we've addressed it, though.
Okay. Any other questions for the fire chief? Yeah.
The areas you're talking about where we have a problem with lack of a water system, those aren't associated generally with the development. They're primarily a rural area? Or am I making that distinction?
Well, at one time they were primarily rural.
Yeah, I know
and that's
that.
why it wasn't as much as an issue. But again, as development has hit those areas, then that's created a challenge, a little bit of a challenge for us in firefighting because of the lack of water supply.
So the fault may then be in the development process, that we don't require the extension of water lines as these new developments take place?
Well, again, that would be preferable to have that water supply out there, but I know that there's a tremendous expense, and I know developers like to try and approach that in other ways, and so therefore that's why that we currently allow for options, that they can put in retention ponds in that development that we can draft water from to use. They can put in a storage tank.
Aren't those generally what I would call classify as rural developments, RA or R1 or R2 lots? I mean, they're not typical residential lots. When you have a retention pond.
I would say it's a little bit of both. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? All right, Chief, thanks.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
That concludes the Finance Committee.
All right, we'll adjourn the Finance Committee, reconvene the council meeting with the consent docket. All right, any comments or questions on the consent docket? Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Nothing on the concurrence docket. Item 7 is items requiring a separate vote. We have one item. Do we need to go into executive session for this?
Yes, sir.
So we should go into executive session before we vote? Okay. Vote to move it into executive session. It is moved. We'll retire for executive session. Do we have items for council?
Jerry, you'd like to do first?
Let's go ahead and have items from council now. Any other comments? Pat?
I just think the budget process that I've been exposed to since I've been on the council is an excellent process. And this seems to be a part of the continuing trend, come up with an improved product each year. And I really want to commend the people who put it together, because I think it was an excellent presentation.
Skip?
Very quickly, Mayor, I just want to echo Pat's comments. This is really, it's an amazing process to go through. And Craig, you and your staff and manager just do a fabulous job helping us get through however many, 700 and 800 pages of intense detail. So thank you very much for that. And I did just want to mention that Saturday is Miller in May. The Miller neighborhood is having their house tour this Saturday from 10 to 4, so I would encourage everybody to come enjoy one of our wonderful inner city neighborhoods.
Okay. David?
Well, just what everyone else has said, I think this budget is a great process, and it shows how much hard work and dedication went into this, as well as I just want to say that I had a great opportunity Friday evening to attend the Police Department's awards presentation, and I appreciate the invitation by the Oklahoma City Police Department to be able to attend that.
Okay. Pete? Larry?
Yeah, I'd like to echo what David said about the awards presentation Saturday night. Friday night, very moving. The officers who were recognized were certainly worthy of their recognition. The bravery and the character that they have displayed in the past was just very inspirational. I'd like to congratulate the South Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce on a very excellently run golf tournament yesterday. Had a great turnout, and I think everybody really enjoyed themselves. Thank you, Your Honor.
Ed?
I'm going to talk just for a minute about an item that was on the consent docket, and that's the widening at 178th Street. And I understand it's a line item on the 2007 bond, so it's already been determined. But I just want to talk, because I think it's a perfect example of a lot of the things that we touched upon last week with the Planning Commission. Really, you're not going to stop sprawl. That's clear. Urban Land Institute estimates that 80% of growth will be in the suburbs, no matter what you do, whether you have maps or develop downtown, you can't stop it. The question is, are we incentivizing it to occur faster than it would otherwise? And then maybe more importantly, the question of what is the philosophy of the council and the Planning Commission in terms of do we provide the infrastructure and then have development follow? Or do we have development dictate to the council where infrastructure is laid, and does that increase cost?
That was a question I asked at the Planning Commission joint workshop.
Right.
That exact same question. Does development lead infrastructure, or does infrastructure lead development? And I don't really think I got an answer. There's a lot of discussion, but I don't think there was a clear statement that it is the city's policy to do blank.
I think we've done both, and Pete, correct me if I'm wrong, but at one time it seemed like we led development in South Oklahoma City, and a development followed, and in North Oklahoma City it seems like we have followed the trends.
I think the area that Councilman Shadid is talking about is an area that we have City Council and the Planning Commission approved a plat or a PUD. We issued building permits and occupancy permits for those people out there. The development was done and encouraged by the city, essentially, by our process, and then we're catching up with the infrastructure. And as that's in my ward, and I know the people out there would probably lynch me if I agreed with Councilman Shadid that that's a bad project. They are desperately in need of improving those streets. If you look at the citizen survey, the number one issue that we have is the poor quality of our streets. I think anything we do to address that problem, we're working in the right direction. Now, it may be that it's in the wrong place, but you talk about response times. Well, a fire engine can travel faster on a 4-lane street than it can on a 2-lane county road. And so I think we need to look at the totality of these projects, not just the fact that it may incentivize sprawl. We've done that before. It's too late to put the toothpaste back in the tube, to use a poor analogy.
We're in terms of budget, we're talking about $40 million to widen basically every street north of Memorial and west of Portland. And when you go back to Jeff Speck's study that the council paid for in 2009, the number one thing he noticed is that we were building streets too wide for the amount of traffic. And that
he is a traffic engineer?
He's an urban planner.
He's not a traffic engineer.
No.
He's not done a study on the number of vehicles that those roads are going.
Well, this was quoted from a study, and he said basically that a 2-lane roadway can comfortably handle 10,000 cars per day. I don't hear anybody disputing that. So based on a lot of...
Well, obviously there's been some dispute because we wouldn't be building 4-lane roads if that was an accepted fact.
Okay, can you go to the next slide? These are the 15 2007 projects that I was referencing. These are the vehicle per day counts. Each one of these is going to cost the taxpayer about $2.5 million.
Have you driven on any of these roads, Councilman?
Yeah, I drove on 178th yesterday.
And the quality of that street is?
There is not one single pothole. There is very nice 4-lane intersections at both 178th and Portland and 178th and May.
And we need to connect those intersections, so we'll have a nice road in between them.
Well, let's look at the vehicle counts, because to go to 4 lanes, you generally should have 10,000 vehicles per day. Only 4 of the 15, each one of which we're spending $2.5 million on, meet that criteria. Some of them are far below the 10,000 per day criteria. When you chase development, and so you've got some development there, and then you try and go from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, you increase the cost. So it's costing more than it would have if we had decided ahead of time, this is where we're going to put 4 lanes.
I've made that same point several times. Thank you.
Okay, so I am reading everything I can get my hands on. I've talked to Russell Klaus, Dennis Clowers. They're feeding me book after book. Nobody's saying, or I'm not reading anything that says it's a good idea to chase development with infrastructure. I haven't heard anybody articulate that. I haven't heard really anybody in city staff in favor of it. And I just, this is $40 million. And
Our citizens were in favor of it.
Well, I mean, did they see these vehicle per day counts?
But they were driving on those roads when they voted for those bond issue projects. They felt there was a need there.
Ed, is your point that we are leading development, and that my perception that we're not?
Development is leading us. There's not. There's the lack of planning. There's that's costing us more. We're spending money in areas that we probably don't need to spend in some cases for 10, 20 years later when we have other needs. But for some reason we're spending it on $2.5 million for roads that have vehicle counts of 3,000 a day and going to 4 lanes. We don't have mixed-use development. We don't have a walkable city, and this is what Jeff Speck cited as the #1 reason, is that we've got too wide of roads for the demand.
I think a lot of Jeff Speck's work with regard to those 4-lane roads and 6-lane roads was concentrated in downtown.
That's true.
It really wasn't focused on the suburbs, and he was looking at streets like Hudson in front of us here that, looks like a landing strip, I think maybe is the way he described it. And so I really think we're kind of blending apples and oranges here in terms of his study and his discussion about walkability.
I agree that his main focus was downtown, but the same principles apply to the suburbs and to neighborhoods in terms of walkability.
Larry?
I wasn't going to say anything, but I think I need to enter into something here. The bond projects that we're talking about were approved in 2007, and anecdotal evidence, one of the bond projects that was involved in Ward 3, Ed, was to resurface a number of neighborhood streets. The first neighborhood that was selected was the Westwatch area out in southwestern Oklahoma City. When we announced that we were going to come out and we offered the people out there the option of having a sidewalk on one side of their street as part of the reconstruction work of their streets, the vote was 96-1 against sidewalks because the neighborhood had been platted a number of years ago, and the neighborhood was not conducive to the inclusion of sidewalks into the neighborhood. There was no setbacks that would do it, and so we did the streets out there, and we did not put sidewalks in at the preference of the neighbors. And I think sometimes some of our studies fail to realize that what we're in the business of doing is meeting the expectations of our neighbors, and in this case, the resurfacing did not include the sidewalk, even though the original bond program is set up that any neighborhood street that is resurfaced will have a sidewalk on one side of the street.
Okay. As will 178th Street.
All right. Gary? All right. City manager reports?
Nothing this morning, sir.
Citizens to be heard? All right. We have executive session. We'll be right back.